Chapter 241, Extra Story, Emma, 1. Gah, it's cold. Emma cried out as she stuck out her tongue, wiggling it dramatically in the air-conditioned chill of the mall's food court. Brain freeze. Ice cream is cold, Arthur thought blankly as he looked at her, not understanding why she reacted with such theatrical dismay to one of the fundamental properties of frozen dairy. It was like being surprised that gravity made things fall downward or that breathing was generally necessary for continued existence. The shopping mall around them buzzed with weekend activity. Teenagers clustered around phone shops, harried parents dragged reluctant children from store to store, and a janitor was having what appeared to be a deeply philosophical moment while contemplating a particularly stubborn piece of gum on the floor. Emma's eyes narrowed as she caught Arthur's blank look. Her spoon hovered halfway to her mouth, a small mountain of mint chocolate chip balanced precariously on its edge. "Hey, where's your compassion?" she asked as she leaned in close. The tiny flecks of gold in her irises caught the fluorescent lighting, and Arthur noted, not for the first time, how unusual that eye color was. Probably contacts, part of her disguise. "I don't have compassion for Edie Dash. People lacking in the cognitive department," Arthur rebuked, catching himself just before the insult fully formed. Not because he cared about her feelings, he told himself, but because being overtly rude wasn't tactically sound when observing a subject. Emma should have known better than to eat ice cream so quickly. Either she was genuinely susceptible to brain freeze, unlikely for someone with her presumed training, or she was playing a role. Arthur's money was firmly on the latter. "Stop trying to use fancy words to dodge what I am saying." Emma huffed as she shoveled another spoonful of ice cream into her mouth. She was wearing a school uniform that had been meticulously modified to appear casually disheveled, the kind of careful disorder that took far more effort than simply being neat. She isn't faking, Arthur thought with a small jolt of surprise. Emma's habit of acting like a clueless girl seemed to have dropped mysteriously. The programmed vapidity had faltered, revealing something more authentic underneath. It was interesting. He wanted to dissect her, metaphorically speaking, of course. Mostly metaphorically. Arthur's eyes darted around the food court, his attention sharpened by years of advanced cognitive training. There, by the fake potted plant, a man reading yesterday's newspaper despite having the latest smartphone visible in his pocket. And another near the escalators, whose casual glances their way came at suspiciously regular 15-second intervals. "Let's go, Emma," he said as Emma tilted her head, a cascade of honey blonde hair falling over one shoulder in what Arthur reluctantly admitted was an aesthetically pleasing manner. Not that he cared about such things. He grabbed her hand, noting the calluses that no regular academy student would have, and led her into a narrow passage between stores, where a sign promising vintage video games, cartridges va consoles, flickered with actual neon rather than LEDs. Arthur's keen senses picked up the followers immediately. Two men, moving with the practiced nonchalance of people who have been specifically trained to appear nonchalant, which paradoxically makes them stand out like combat boots at a swimming pool. "Arthur, where are we going?" Emma asked, her voice pitched perfectly between confusion and intrigue. "The movie theater is the other way, and you promised we could see Love in the Time of Calculus." He hadn't promised any such thing, which meant she was establishing cover. "Interesting. Change of plans," he said, guiding her deeper into the service corridors where deliveries were made to the mall's various shops. The followers would have to reveal themselves more obviously to continue pursuit in the narrower space. Arthur's mind raced through 17 different scenarios, calculating probabilities and outcomes. The most efficient path forward was obvious: put Emma in controlled danger, force her to reveal her true capabilities, and end this tedious charade once and for all. The service corridor led to a loading dock with an alarm system. Perfect. He could accidentally trigger the security alarm, causing the mall's security team to respond. Nothing that would cause real danger to someone with Emma's training, but enough to force her hand. His fingers moved toward the fire alarm, ready to pull it and create a controlled chaos. A simple act, barely worth considering, but effective. Then Emma smiled at him, not the practiced, symmetrical smile of her cover identity, but a slightly lopsided one that appeared when she thought he wasn't looking. A tiny imperfection in her careful performance. Arthur's hand froze midway to the alarm. He thought of that smile. He thought of the way she had laughed 3 weeks ago when he had accidentally told an actual joke. He thought of how she always saved him the last chocolate bar in the vending machine even though her cover didn't require such consistency. "Arthur? Is everything okay?" she asked, and he noted with clinical detachment that his pulse had quickened. His rational mind immediately suggested taking a deep breath to regulate it. He ignored the suggestion. "Fine," he said shortly, rerouting their path away from the loading dock. "I thought I saw someone following us, but it was just a security guard on his rounds." It wasn't. The operatives were still there, now joined by a third whose attempt at blending in was good but not good enough to fool Arthur's perception, honed by years of observation and analysis. The most logical course of action remained unchanged: expose Emma, end the game. Yet for reasons his formidable intellect struggled to quantify, he couldn't do it. Not because it wouldn't work, it would, with near certainty, but because her smile had added color to his world of grayscale logic and binary outcomes. Because in a life of calculated movements and strategic decisions, she was the one variable he couldn't quite solve. And strangely, he found he didn't want to. "Let's circle back through the food court," he said instead. "I know a way to lose them without making a scene." Emma looked at him with genuine surprise, another crack in her cover. "Them?" Arthur smiled thinly. "The mall security. They get suspicious when students linger in service corridors during school hours." "Right," she said, recovering quickly. "Security guards. Of course." As they walked, Arthur catalogued, against his better judgment, the exact shade of her hair under the different lighting sections of the mall, the precise cadence of her steps, and the way she unconsciously adjusted her pace to match his. Data points without tactical value, yet somehow more compelling than the strategic assessment of their pursuers. What an inconvenient development, he thought. Completely irrational. And yet, as they emerged back into the colorful chaos of the mall, he found he didn't mind it nearly as much as he should. Chapter 242, Second Year, 1. The second year at Mythos Academy had begun. A fresh start. A new battlefield. Unlike the first year, where everything had been about adapting, proving ourselves, and surviving the brutal hierarchy of the Academy's rankings, the second year was different. This year had 2 major events. The Inter-Academy Festival, a competition between the strongest academies in the world, where our skills would be tested against the best of the best. And the field trip turned disaster. After a quiet first night back, I adjusted to my new dorm, Ophelia Hall. It wasn't particularly different in terms of size or luxury from my old first-year dorm, but the location had changed. I was now on the top floor, which meant 2 things: more time in the elevator but also more privacy. A fair trade. Morning came quickly. I dressed in my Mythos Academy uniform, which remained largely the same, except now, where the Roman numeral I had been, a bold 2 was stitched onto the fabric, marking my promotion to the second year. A small change. But a significant one. Then, I made my way to the commencement ceremony. The Hyperloop station was busy, students rushing towards the auditorium, eager whispers filling the air. As I boarded, I felt more eyes on me than usual. Not surprising. Dancing with 3 princesses at major noble events and securing rank 1 in the most competitive generation in years had made me somewhat of a campus-wide sensation. Annoying. But expected. The Hyperloop arrived, and I stepped into the massive auditorium, where thousands of second years were already seated. My gaze scanned the room until I spotted 4 familiar heads. 2 blonde, 1 silver, 1 brown. They were all sitting together, an empty seat left right in the middle. Oh. For me. I made my way over and took the seat between Rachel and Serafina, with Cecilia and Rose sitting beside them. Rachel turned, huffing. "You took so long." I smirked. "Takes time to look this good." Cecilia snorted. "You took longer than the 4 of us, and we're girls." I rolled my eyes. Stop complaining. Before she could retort, the lights dimmed. Silence settled over the crowd as a figure stepped onto the stage. A woman with navy blue hair, her aura unmistakably commanding. Eva Lopez, headmaster of Mythos Academy. Serafina leaned slightly towards me, murmuring, "We really get preferential treatment, huh?" I hummed in agreement. Then, Eva's voice rang through the auditorium. "Hello, second years." Her voice was smooth, controlled, sharp enough to command respect, but warm enough not to be outright intimidating. "Welcome back to Mythos Academy. I trust your summer break was both eventful and, hopefully, relaxing." A murmur rippled through the audience. Relaxing? Yeah, sure. If getting nearly killed by a Radiant rank cult leader counted as relaxing. "Now," Eva continued, "I will outline a few key changes for your second year." The auditorium stilled. As before, you will undergo 2 practical evaluations in your first semester. However, your midterm and final evaluations will be merged into a single event, the Inter-Academy Festival, taking place in December. A buzz of excitement spread through the room. The Inter-Academy Festival wasn't just some internal ranking test. It was a world stage competition where Mythos Academy would be facing off against other top academies, with nobles, guild representatives, and world leaders watching. Additionally, Eva continued, second years are now required to join a club as part of their elective program. If no existing club suits your needs, you may form your own, provided it is a unique concept and has at least 4 members, including yourself. I barely processed that before her next words rang out. "Now, will the 2 student representatives step onto the stage?" A pause. Then, she read the names. Rank 1, representing the male students, Arthur Nightingale. No reaction from me. Expected. Rank 4, representing the female students, Rachel Creighton. I felt Rachel stiffen beside me before she let out a dramatic sigh. "Why is it us?" I chuckled, pushing myself up from my seat. "Because we're the best, obviously." She gave me a flat look. "I swear, you're getting more arrogant by the day." I grinned. "Only because I know you secretly love it." Rachel rolled her eyes, but I caught the slight pink hue dusting her cheeks. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes on me as I walked toward the stage. The second year had officially begun. After Rachel and I repeated the oath, we made our way back to our seats. The ceremony was far shorter than last year's, less fanfare, less drawn-out explanations. No need for hand-holding this time. We were second years now. They expected us to already know the rules. And just like that, it was over. No time wasted. Straight to class. Since Rose had been moved to Class A, all 5 of us, Rachel, Cecilia, Serafina, Rose, and I, were now in the same homeroom. We walked together, weaving through the halls of the second-year building until we reached the 5th floor. The moment we entered the classroom, I took a quick scan of the room. 8 other students were already inside. Lucifer, Ren, Jean, Ian. Anne. Clana Lopez. So she's here now too. The headmaster's daughter. A slight surprise, but not entirely unexpected. Clana was strong enough to deserve a place here. Still, her inclusion meant something. The academy didn't make changes to Classa lightly. Then there was Lucifer. I felt it before I even looked at him. The shift. The change in his presence. He had already completed the second stage of integration. Twice the mana quality, twice the mana quantity. He could already take down a mid-integration rank opponent. And that meant he was stronger than me. For now. I clicked my tongue, shifting my focus back to Rose. "Wait, Rose, what's your rank?" I asked. She smiled, casual as always. "Rank 10. I blinked. "Oh. Not bad." She chuckled. Not bad? Please, Arthur, I just got here. Give me some time. We took our seats, following the usual class hierarchy. First row, Lucifer and I. Second row, Rachel and Ren. Third row, Cecilia and Serafina. Fourth row, Jean and Ian. Fifth row, Rose and Clanna. Clanna and Rose were the weakest students here, but they were already at mid-silver rank. Ren and Rachel were both at white rank, but I could tell Ren had already began the integration process and would likely complete the second stage by the time the festival began. The door slid open. A familiar figure strode inside, his presence as imposing as ever. Professor Nero Estrellan. His sharp gray eyes scanned the classroom, taking us all in. "Welcome back, Class A," he greeted, his voice even, measured. Then, his gaze flicked to Rose and Clanna. "And welcome to our 2 new students." He clasped his hands behind his back. "Now, let's begin the briefing for your second year at Mythos Academy." Chapter 243, Second Year, 2. "Alright, let me begin by explaining the 2 practical evaluations," Nero said, his voice carrying the same no-nonsense authority as always. "Both evaluations will be missions," he continued. "They are compulsory, and you may only undertake them during the first semester. However, you will have the freedom to choose which missions you take on, within reason. A certain level of difficulty is expected, and I will personally be reviewing and approving each selection." His gaze swept over the class, lingering slightly on those he deemed the most reckless. "Furthermore, these missions must be completed individually," he added. "There will be no partnerships, no team efforts. You will succeed or fail on your own merits." That sent a ripple of unease through the class, but no one spoke. Moving on, Nero continued, "Next semester, any of you may formally announce your candidacy for Student Council President. The elected student will take charge of the lower years in your third year. As the president, you will have full authority over the delegation of student council positions and may assign roles at your discretion." That got more of a reaction. A few murmurs. Some thoughtful expressions. The student council president wasn't just a fancy title, it came with real power. The ability to influence academy policies, secure funding for personal projects, and access to classified mission requests. Nero let the weight of that sink in before he moved on. "In January, we will embark on a field trip to one of the continents," he continued. "In May, we will have the end-of-year festival." His voice remained impassive, but everyone knew the field trip wasn't just a vacation. "And, of course, in December," Nero said, his eyes sharp, "we have the Inter-Academy Festival. I will explain the details of that when the time comes." The class was silent. The Inter-Academy Festival was the event of the year, where Mythos Academy clashed with rival institutions in a world stage competition. This wasn't just about grades or internal rankings. This was about proving we were the strongest generation in the world. "For now," Nero continued, unbothered by the tension in the room, "you have your new classes, as well as the sophomore ball." At his words, all 10 of us instinctively checked our phones as our schedules updated. I had 4 practical classes again. Spellcasting 4, Enhanced Aura Mechanics, Pure Light Eye and Deep Dark Eye. I felt a shift in attention as a few people glanced toward me and Lucifer. "Some of your classes," Nero said, his gaze flickering between the 2 of us, "have been tailored for future progression, given the unique nature of white rank and integration rank." Lucifer and I exchanged a glance before nodding. No one questioned it. "And for your classes," Nero continued, his gaze sweeping over us, "they may not always be limited to second years. Some of you will be placed alongside third years for certain subjects, given your progress." He let the words settle before adding, "However, we have ensured that none of your classes will overlap with fourth years or above." That meant one thing: we were strong, but not strong enough to be thrown in with the monsters yet. "All right," Nero said, straightening. "You are dismissed. Make your way to your first classes." The room filled with the sound of chairs scraping back and murmured conversations as we stood and filed out into the hallway. Lucifer, who had been quiet throughout the briefing, glanced at me as we stepped into the corridor. "Arthur, what classes do you have?" I listed them off. He nodded. "We have spellcasting 4 and enhanced aura mechanics together, then." I wasn't surprised. His schedule would naturally lean toward combat-heavy courses, just like mine. "Let's head to enhanced aura mechanics together," he suggested. I agreed easily. After a quick chat with the girls, who were already discussing their own schedules, I left with Lucifer, making our way toward the third-year building. Enhanced aura was a step beyond normal aura, the next stage of development for warriors who used the aura method. It was something that could only be formed from the mana of an integration ranker. Technically, Lucifer and I could already mimic it, but true mastery would only come once we completed the full integration process. Lucifer would probably master it faster than anyone. His black and white mana, born from his supernatural gift, was what made him infamous. The moment he properly reached integration rank, the world would see why he was considered a monster. We talked as we walked through the hallways, our conversation casual. It was strange, in a way. The awkwardness that had existed between us when we first met had faded. We weren't exactly close, but there was understanding now. Respect, even. The third-year building was noticeably quieter than the second-year one. There were fewer students in the halls, and the air felt heavier, like the people here had already been tempered by fire. Lucifer and I reached the classroom and stepped inside. 3 people were already there. The professor, who was scanning through a tablet at his desk, and 2 third-year students sitting near the front. Both of them were integration rankers. Lucifer and I exchanged a look. This would be interesting. "Welcome, students." Lucifer Windward. Arthur Nightingale. The voice was smooth, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need to be forced. The professor, a man in his early 40s with sharp silver hair and a neatly pressed coat, barely spared a glance at us as we entered. His attention remained on the holopad in his hand, but there was no doubt that he had already sized us up the moment we stepped inside. "I am Professor Lucas," he continued, finally setting the device aside to focus on us. "I will be teaching you both the principles and applications of enhanced aura." His gaze flickered between Lucifer and me, assessing, calculating. "You two are exceptions in this class," he said. "Not in strength, but in progress. Neither of you have reached integration rank yet, which means you will not be able to sustain enhanced aura for long." Lucifer and I nodded, accepting the fact. Enhanced aura was a step beyond standard aura. It required the kind of stabilized mana flow that only an integration ranker naturally possessed. For now, we could mimic it, but not truly wield it. "For now," Lucas said, motioning for us to take our seats, "I will explain the theory behind it." We sat down next to each other, both of us silent, watching as Lucas flicked his fingers. A holographic projection sprang to life in front of the classroom, displaying the outline of a human body, veins of golden energy threading through it like a complex circuit. "Enhanced aura," Lucas began, tapping a point on the projection, "is not simply a more powerful version of standard aura. If that were the case, any sufficiently strong individual would naturally develop it." The golden veins in the projection pulsed, shifting into thicker, more refined lines. Aura, in its base form, is raw mana being converted into force. It coats the body, reinforcing durability, speed, and strength. He tapped the projection again, and the golden lines narrowed, condensing into concentrated nodes across the body. Enhanced aura is different. Instead of mana simply flowing outward, it is compressed and refined, allowing it to be used at a much more efficient and deadly level. Lucifer leaned forward slightly, watching the display with sharp focus. I, too, narrowed my eyes, committing every detail to memory. Lucas continued, his tone steady. "With standard aura, effort directly influences output. A stronger push of mana results in a more reinforced body. But enhanced aura does not rely on sheer output, it relies on control. The ability to mold and stabilize your aura into a form that doesn't simply act as a shield, but as a part of you, indistinguishable from your physical self." I nodded slowly, understanding the principle. So instead of just reinforcing ourselves, enhanced aura allows us to move and react as if the aura itself is alive? Lucas gave me a pleased look. Correct. A warrior using enhanced aura does not simply strike harder, they move with flawless flow, wasting no energy, no unnecessary motion. The projection changed again, showing two figures. One was coated in a thick, blazing aura, the way most high-ranked warriors fought. The other had barely any visible glow at all. The first moved with raw power, every swing of their weapon carving through the air with sheer force. But the second did not move wastefully at all. Every strike, every block, every shift in their stance was flawless, not a single drop of mana wasted. The aura wasn't just reinforcing them, it was an extension of them. Enhanced aura is not about making your aura stronger, Lucas said. It is about making it a part of you. Those who fail to understand this will never master it, no matter how much mana they possess. Lucifer exhaled through his nose, arms crossed. And how do we train it? Lucas smiled, and I didn't like the look in his eyes. By forcing your body to adapt. I had the sinking feeling this was about to be painful. Lucas turned to the two third-year students in the room. Since you two are new to this class, let's make sure you understand the difference between regular aura and enhanced aura, he said smoothly. You will spar against them, without using your gifts. The two third years, who had been watching in silence until now, grinned. Ah. I knew where this was going. Lucifer glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Then, he exhaled. Fine. Fine, I echoed, standing up. Lucas gestured for us to follow him to the sparring chamber adjacent to the classroom. The two third years stood as well, rolling their shoulders, cracking their knuckles. Their aura wasn't explosive, wasn't flaring with raw power, but it was dense. Compact. Controlled. I could already tell. We were about to get beaten senseless. Lucas clasped his hands behind his back, watching us with something dangerously close to amusement. Try to last at least 5 minutes, he said. Lucifer sighed. No guarantees. I cracked my neck. Let's get this over with. Chapter 244, Second Year, 3. It's always worth asking yourself, what decides a fight? Mana? Talent? Technique? Or maybe sheer stubborn determination to not fall over before the other guy does? Facing the third-year student across from me, it felt like a question that needed a deeper exploration. He had the calm confidence of someone who knew he had an unfair advantage and wasn't embarrassed about it. Integration rankers had 3 times the mana quality and quantity compared to those of us still clawing at the barrier between white and integration. It was as if we were all playing the same game, except his dice went up to 20 and mine only managed 6, on a good day. Not that I didn't have a few tricks tucked up my sleeve, mind you. Erebus, Lucent Harmony, my pair of ancient artifacts, these would comfortably have turned the tide of the battle. But unfortunately, Professor Lucas was very specific about the rules, and they didn't allow for me to use anything more exciting than my own 2 hands and pure mana under the aura method. Begin, Lucas said, his voice holding the neutrality of someone calling out a lottery number. The third year wasted no time. He moved forward sharply, his steps precise, his aura dense and controlled, coiled around his body like a glove. Each move he made was textbook perfect. His attacks weren't especially flashy or inventive, but the gap in sheer mana alone gave his strikes the kind of heaviness usually reserved for blunt instruments swung by angry giants. I dodged neatly to the left, feeling a thrill of exhilaration run down my spine. There was no denying it, this boy was skilled. His punches sliced the air, each movement carrying a finely honed efficiency that wasted no momentum. Every strike was deliberate, his body wrapped snugly in a cloak of enhanced aura. It wasn't flashy moves are for amateurs, but it was brutally effective. I kept on my toes, staying calm, eyes narrow. I was a problem solver at heart, after all. Combat was no different. If my opponent wanted to overwhelm me with sheer mana volume, I'd just have to beat him with precision and timing. So I moved carefully, measured and conservative, letting him lead the dance, my own aura rippling quietly under my skin. "Not bad," he murmured, his expression calm, no sweat on his brow. "But is this it? Is this really the #1 prodigy of Mythos Academy's strongest generation?" I smiled at him, friendly-like. "Would you prefer if I made it look harder?" His expression flickered, uncertainty breaking the surface briefly before disappearing again under the serene mask. Good. Let him doubt. Let him question. This was the part of fighting I liked most, the mental chess, the hidden layers beneath each exchange. He lunged again, his fist wrapped in a tightly controlled aura that hummed like an angry hornet. I ducked beneath his strike, slipping sideways. A quick step, a subtle shift, and I landed a clean punch to his ribs. He gasped, slightly, as surprise flitted across his face. It hadn't hurt much, his enhanced aura was like hitting solid stone, but even rocks crack eventually if you hit them in the right spot enough times. That's how it went on for several minutes, me dodging, him chasing, our auras clashing and weaving. Each exchange left him visibly more frustrated, less patient. His aura was dense and potent, yes, but predictable. Easy to read, easier to avoid. I was wearing him down, though not by strength, but by skill and cunning. Even Professor Lucas raised an eyebrow in quiet curiosity. But there was the problem. A rather significant one, at that. Enhanced aura was not a toy you could use indefinitely if you hadn't broken through the integration wall. My mana reserves were limited, no matter how clever I was or how carefully I rationed my energy. The trouble with being a prodigy was that you kept hitting ceilings you couldn't surpass through sheer talent alone. Eventually, the mana tap ran dry. I felt the strain begin to bite, the burning exhaustion spreading from my core to every limb. My aura faltered, flickered slightly, and the third year didn't miss it. His eyes gleamed with triumph. "Looks like you've reached your limit," he said, almost apologetically, before driving forward again. His fist slammed into my side, and this time I was slower. Enhanced aura, still imperfectly mastered, was already slipping away from me, dissipating like steam from a kettle left off the boil. I blocked a few blows, dodged another, but each movement cost me more than the last. He came at me relentlessly, capitalizing on every momentary lapse, every hesitation. My mind still raced, calculating openings, weaknesses, but my body betrayed me. I couldn't produce more enhanced aura than this, not yet, anyway. My vision blurred, edges going fuzzy. The third year didn't let up, pressing the advantage until finally, a carefully placed strike hit me in the chest, shattering the fragile shell of aura I'd been maintaining. I hit the ground with the undignified thud of defeat, landing hard on my back, panting heavily as my breath returned in ragged gasps. The room was silent for a heartbeat, before Professor Lucas nodded approvingly. "Not bad at all, Arthur. You lasted longer than most would have." The third year approached, offering me a hand, genuine respect etched in his features. "Good fight." I took his hand and pulled myself up, feeling my muscles protest loudly. I met his eyes evenly, smiling again. "Likewise." My gaze flickered toward Lucifer. He had been watching carefully, evaluating every second. I could see his expression clearly enough. A mixture of quiet surprise, slight curiosity, and something else, respect? Perhaps. Or a renewed sense of rivalry. I exhaled slowly, regaining my bearings. No shame in losing. Not yet. Because soon enough, the tables would turn. Integration rank wasn't too far away from me either, and when it came, I knew very well who would be chasing whom. I dusted off my uniform, trying not to wince as the bruises decided now was a good time to make themselves known. My muscles weren't pleased with me, but then, muscles seldom are. They seem to prefer being left alone, and the moment you introduce them to strenuous exercise, they complain louder than a politician caught in a scandal. I glanced sideways as Lucifer stepped forward. The third year facing him had an easy confidence about him, someone who knew exactly how big a gap existed between him and his opponent and wasn't afraid to use it. The spar began quietly, neither Lucifer nor the third year making any reckless moves. I watched closely, studying Lucifer's form, his aura burning bright around him, more controlled than mine had been. His every motion was like poetry written by someone who was very, very angry. Direct, efficient, but elegantly furious. For a moment, I felt a pang of envy. Lucifer's aura was practically flawless. Even with my extensive understanding and tactical prowess, my physical limits had betrayed me. But Lucifer moved as if he hadn't even heard of exhaustion. His opponent stepped forward, aura denser, heavier, like trying to cut steel with a sharpened spoon. He had power, integration-level power, and that wasn't something one could simply outsmart. But Lucifer wasn't interested in outsmarting anyone. He stood his ground, pushing forward, the force of his enhanced aura rippling through the air like thunder trapped in glass. It became clear to everyone watching, this wasn't just a test anymore. The third year's expression shifted from calm confidence to careful caution. Their blows collided, aura flaring, illuminating the room in a cascade of energy. Yet, slowly, inevitably, Lucifer began to falter. I could see it clearly. Each exchange cost him more energy than his opponent, and despite his superior skill, sheer power had a language all its own. But then Lucifer smiled. Not the polite smile of a student greeting a professor or the sarcastic smirk he saved for rivals. It was the smile of someone who decided, against all reasonable logic, to set the whole board on fire just to see what might happen. In a flash, he surged forward, the air around him vibrating as his aura intensified to a level I didn't think he could sustain yet. He abandoned caution entirely, exchanging precision for raw intensity, forcing his opponent to match him blow for blow. The older student's composed expression cracked, surprise turning to alarm, then outright astonishment. The exchange became a blur, raw aura crackling and popping as it clashed. Both of them poured everything into a final, decisive strike, the sound like mountains politely disagreeing. Dust settled, the tension in the air draining slowly away. Lucifer and the third year were both on their knees, breathing heavily, a look of mutual respect passing between them. A draw. Lucifer had forced an integration ranker into a draw without using the full power of his gifts or his grade 6 art. Professor Lucas, watching silently, nodded in quiet approval. Impressive, both of you, he said calmly, clearly intrigued by what he had seen. Remember this feeling. Skill and strength must balance each other. Too much of one without the other is no better than none at all. Lucifer rose, his breath still labored, sweat trickling down his brow. He met my gaze, a faint smirk returning to his lips, though his eyes were tired. It wasn't the victory he'd aimed for, but against an integration ranker, a draw was already impressive enough. I shook my head slightly in amused admiration. Professor Lucas turned to face us fully again, his voice calm but authoritative. Now then, shall we move on to the next lesson? Chapter 245, Second Year, 4. Enhanced aura mechanics had been about as useful as a book with half the pages missing. Informative, certainly, but not something I could truly apply until I actually reached low integration rank. At best, it was like being given instructions for a machine I wasn't allowed to turn on yet. Still, knowledge was knowledge, and I filed it away for later use. After class, I found myself on the training grounds, surrounded by the quiet hum of magic woven into the very air. This was where I could actually do something useful, testing the limits of my time, gravity, and space magic. Elemental hierarchy wasn't just a ranking of which magic was flashiest. It was an order defined by complexity, versatility, and sheer reality warping potential. Light and dark stood alone at the top, not because they were the strongest in brute force, but because they didn't obey the same rules as the rest. Every other element followed the fundamental laws of magic, light and dark simply didn't. They functioned on a different set of principles, ones no mage had ever fully unraveled. Below them sat the three that shaped existence itself, time, space, and gravity. The trifecta of reality, as they were sometimes called. Time magic, at first glance, seemed like the most powerful of them all. The ability to control time? The possibilities sounded infinite. Rewind a mistake, pause a battle, undo death itself. It was the kind of magic that made gods out of mortals. In theory. In reality, time magic was one of the most disappointing disciplines to actually use. No one could rewind time. That was a fantasy, a fevered dream of scholars who had never actually tried using it. The very idea of rewinding time, of undoing the past, was fundamentally impossible. At best, you could slow things down for a few moments, freeze someone in place for a fraction of a second, or speed up your own reflexes just enough to make a difference in a fight. Useful? Yes. Reality-shattering? Hardly. The only reason time magic hadn't faded into obscurity was because it was stupidly difficult to counter. A skilled time mage could manipulate the flow of a fight in ways that no other element could, even if the effects were temporary. But true manipulation of time, the kind that turned back the clock or created alternate futures? That was a bedtime story for gullible first years. Space magic had a similar problem. It sounded invincible at first: teleportation, warping space, bending reality around yourself so attacks never even reached you. But once you actually tried to use it, the limitations became painfully clear. Teleportation wasn't instantaneous. It required precise calculations, immense mana control, and a ridiculous amount of focus. Mess up even slightly, and you'd end up embedding yourself halfway through a wall or dropping yourself into the middle of the ocean. And while warping space to block attacks was effective, it was also absurdly mana-intensive. The only reason space magic remained relevant was because of its potential in travel. If humans ever figured out interstellar exploration, it wouldn't be through technology. It would be through space magic. But for now, even that was still beyond reach. Gravity magic, on the other hand, was refreshingly straightforward. You increase gravity, things get heavier. You decrease gravity, things get lighter. You condense it, you get black holes. It was practical, devastating in combat, and didn't require a dozen calculations every time you wanted to use it. Ren was living proof of its effectiveness. His family's grade 6 art, Void Fist, was a brutal demonstration of how gravity could be used to destroy, control, and manipulate the battlefield at will. Compared to time and space, gravity magic was the least fancy. It was also the one that punched the hardest. My training partner? Callie Malekith. Since reaching integration rank, the gap between us had widened in ways that I wasn't entirely comfortable with. If I pushed myself to the absolute limit, burned through every ounce of mana, every trick, every ounce of my will, I could maybe, barely, eke out a win against her in a straight fight. But that wasn't the point of this training. She stood across from me, her stance casual but coiled, like a predator waiting for an excuse to pounce. Her brown eyes locked onto mine, dark and unreadable, and she flicked her black hair over her shoulder with the ease of someone who wasn't remotely concerned about how this was going to go. "Let's get started already, Arthur," she said, impatience creeping into her tone. "Right. No need for dramatic monologues." I let out a breath, and the sigils of lucent harmony flared to life on my skin, glowing softly as the world sharpened around me. The usual rush of calm settled over my core, a cold, logical clarity that wiped away all hesitation. I could see mana, not just as an external force but as an interconnected weave, every strand of it alive and shifting. More than that, I could feel the elements I had no direct control over: time, space, gravity, tugging at the edges of my senses, waiting. An overpowered ability, really. The kind that made you wonder if the universe had been a little too generous in handing it out. Not that I was complaining. I refrained from using my artifact, keeping things fair, for now. The air between us rippled as Callie activated her own mana. It was dark, thick, coiling around her like living shadows. She didn't just manipulate darkness, she became it, her presence spreading through the training grounds like an approaching storm. I shifted my stance, weight balanced, muscles relaxed. "Don't hold back," I said. "You know I won't," she replied with a smirk, her mana flaring. The ground trembled slightly beneath us, reacting to the sheer density of our combined forces. It was subtle, but noticeable. And then she moved. Fast. A surge of shadows erupted from her, a dozen tendrils lashing toward me with surgical precision. I bent space around myself at the last second, distorting my position ever so slightly, just enough that her attack twisted mid-air, thrown off course. The tendrils snapped past me, missing by inches. She didn't stop. A barrage of mana-infused strikes followed, each one faster than the last. I shifted, raising the gravity around her in a controlled pulse, making her every motion heavier, her attacks slower. For a moment, it worked. Then, with nothing but a sharp exhale, she shattered my spell, breaking free as if the increased weight had been nothing more than a passing inconvenience. Annoying. Shadows surged toward me again, relentless, and this time I had no choice but to freeze time, just for a fraction of a second. Enough space to move. I sidestepped, letting reality snap back into place as her attack crashed into the spot I had just occupied. The sheer force of it tore through the ground, sending shards of stone scattering. At this point, you're going to force me to go all out, I said, rolling my shoulders, the familiar weight of mana pooling in my core. Callie tilted her head, eyes gleaming with amusement. Then do it. She flicked her wrist, and her twin daggers materialized in her hands, spinning effortlessly between her fingers like they were extensions of herself. Deep dark clung to the blades, rippling unnaturally in the air around them. Dagger intent. The sharp edge of her will condensed into pure lethality, the kind that didn't just cut flesh, it severed intent, opportunity, and escape. I exhaled. No more half measures. Erebus, I called. A rift tore open beside me, a sliver of dark space unraveling like the edge of a frayed tapestry. From within, my lich emerged, skeletal frame gleaming in the dim light. His hollow sockets burned with an eerie red glow as he bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement. Callie's expression flickered, just for a moment. A tightness around the corners of her lips, an imperceptible stiffening of her stance. Good. She wasn't underestimating me anymore. Bone armor, I commanded. The crimson bones of a blood wyvern snaked around me, fusing into a protective exoskeleton, wrapping my arms and chest in curved, jagged plates. It wasn't just armor, it was a fortress woven from death itself. Then, I activated my white star. A surge of radiant light burned from my core, dodging mine and Erebus's deep dark. In my hand, my sword glowed, not with simple mana, not even with aura. Pure light. Something that had long surpassed the constraints of mana, existing in a realm of its own. Still confident? I asked, gripping my blade. Callie pursed her lips. You're still a rank below me. She spun her daggers, the deep dark clinging to them thickening like liquid smoke. But let's fight, shall we? And so, the spar between rank 1 of the second years and rank 1 of the third years began. Chapter 246, Second Year, 5. Clang. Callie's daggers slipped from her fingers, the twin blades clattering against the stone floor with a hollow ring. A moment later, her knees gave way, and she collapsed onto the ground, panting, sweat dripping from her brow. Arthur, barely standing himself, rolled his shoulders, wincing at the strain in his muscles. He extended a hand toward her. Good fight. Callie looked up at him, eyes sharp, assessing, before finally sighing and accepting the offered hand. Her grip was firm despite her exhaustion. As soon as she was upright, she bent down, retrieving her daggers before flicking them into her spatial ring with a practiced motion. Seriously, you're a monster, she muttered. Arthur just chuckled. He knew what she meant. This fight had dragged on far longer than either of them expected. Neither could gain a definitive advantage over the other, which was absurd, considering Callie had over triple the mana quality and quantity that he did. By all logic, she should have won easily. And yet, she lost. Barely. It had come down to endurance, a test of who could hold out longer, who could force the other to slip first. At first, Callie had the upper hand, her reserves should have let her outlast him. But Arthur never let her keep that advantage for long. You know, she said between breaths, wiping sweat from her brow, your deep dark is stronger than mine. Arthur scoffed. That's only because of Erebus. And even then, I have way less of it than you. Yeah, but then you have pure light. She exhaled, shaking her head. How unfairly unbalanced. Arthur smirked. At least I'm a reliable guild master. Callie gave him a sideways glance, a smirk tugging at her lips. Technically, I'm the guild master on paper, since you're still not a 6-star adventurer. Arthur shrugged. Details. Details? She scoffed. Arthur, with the way you just fought, you could easily get that license. You'd be a 6-star by tomorrow. I don't want to take a test. He waved a hand dismissively. Too much paperwork. Callie stared at him, deadpan. You're ridiculous. I've been told. She shook her head but didn't argue. Instead, she stretched, wincing at the soreness settling into her muscles. Well, I'm definitely going to feel this tomorrow. Arthur rolled his shoulder, feeling the same ache settle deep in his bones. Yeah. But it was worth it. Callie gave him a look, then smirked. It was. They stood in silence for a moment, letting the aftershocks of battle settle. The arena around them, once a pristine training ground, bore the scars of their fight, cracked stone, scorched walls, and the lingering hum of dissipating magic. Callie exhaled, watching him carefully. You know, it won't be long before you reach integration rank. And when you do, you're going to be terrifying. Arthur smiled. I plan on it. Good, Callie said, stretching her arms above her head, her smirk still lingering. 'Cause you need to keep up your end of the bargain. Arthur raised a brow. And what bargain was that again? Callie rolled her eyes. I need you to be the strongest. Geez, fine, Arthur sighed, shaking his head. I'll be the strongest. Good, she said, satisfied. Then, she tilted her head. Anyway, we need to talk about Ouroboros. Your room? Yeah, Arthur nodded. We need to go over some logistics. I don't mind, Callie said, glancing down at herself. But I'm sweaty. Arthur shrugged. Just shower in my room. Callie considered it for a second, then nodded. Fine, but I go first. It's my room, Arthur pointed out. I had to train you, Callie countered, arms crossed. You agreed to it. Only 'cause I wanted to beat you up, she shot back with a grin. Arthur scowled, but the banter remained light-hearted as they made their way back to the dorms, taking the lift up to the top floor. As soon as they stepped inside, Arthur gestured toward the bathroom. Go ahead. But don't take forever. I'm not you, Callie teased before disappearing into the bathroom. Arthur sighed, rubbing his temples. Why did he always end up surrounded by such troublesome people? While she was in there, he moved to the desk, pulling up the latest updates on Ouroboros. The guild was progressing steadily, but there were still so many pieces to arrange, so many logistics to smooth out before he could push forward. After some time, the bathroom door clicked open. Arthur looked up, and immediately frowned. Callie stood in the doorway, rubbing a towel through her damp hair, wearing his shirt. Why are you wearing my t-shirt? He asked, his voice somewhere between exasperation and disbelief. Callie groaned, throwing herself onto his chair. I forgot my clothes. Arthur ran a hand down his face. Then go get them. How will you go back to your room now? My clothes are in the wash, she said, waving him off. They'll be dry by the time I have to leave. Arthur stared at her, unimpressed. At least wear pants. What, the t-shirt is big enough, she said, pulling at the hem as if to prove her point. Arthur exhaled. He wasn't going to win this one. Just, whatever, he muttered, grabbing a towel and heading toward the bathroom. I'm taking a shower. Yeah, Callie said, leaning back, spinning slightly in the chair. As soon as the door clicked shut, she stood up, stretching. Her eyes landed on the mirror near the wardrobe, and after a moment of hesitation, she stepped toward it. The oversized t-shirt hung loosely on her frame, the sleeves almost swallowing her arms, the hem dipping low enough that it almost reached her knees. She turned slightly, tugging at the fabric. "I look weird," she muttered to herself, frowning. Then, after a beat, she smirked. "Whatever," she said, flopping back onto the chair, waiting for Arthur to finish his turn. Callie leaned back in the chair, watching Arthur as he ran a towel through his damp black hair as he showered pretty quickly. He moved with an effortless kind of ease, like someone who had already mapped out his next 10 steps and was just casually walking toward them. It was irritating, in a way. And impressive. At first, she'd almost regretted making that mana oath to follow him as long as he gave her back her family's grade 6 art in the future. Almost. But not anymore. Callie Malekith was a rising genius of the Western continent, second only to Jean Ashbluff. Even though she wasn't a necromancer, an oddity in a continent dominated by them, her mastery of dark mana, both in spell casting and with her daggers, had put her at the top alongside her gift. Yet Arthur was better. There was no other way to phrase it. He wasn't just talented. He wasn't just skilled. He was something else. A paradox. An enigma. Someone who made the impossible look effortless. If anyone was going to be the paragon of this generation, the title reserved for the single most powerful individual among the most talented era the world had ever seen, she was willing to bet it would be him. And the best part? He wasn't content with his current level of strength or the fact he was rank 1. He wanted more. Arthur Nightingale wasn't just aiming for the peak. He was planning to shatter the entire mountain. Finally, he finished towel-drying his hair and sat on the bed, wearing just a simple black t-shirt and loose pants. He looked at her expectantly, stretching his arms behind his head. "All right," he said. "What did we want to talk about?" Callie sighed, shifting in the chair. "Well, first off, that Elias guy you scouted is actually really good." Arthur smirked. "I know." She ignored him. "He's doing a lot of the groundwork for the guild. The logistics, the networking, even some recruitment. Meanwhile, I did the hard work and got us officially established by clearing a 6-star dungeon." Arthur whistled. "Nice. But," she continued, crossing her arms, "I need to know about the 3 other recruits he showed me." Arthur nodded. "Right, the 3 weirdos." "2 weirdos," she corrected. "The third one is the problem." Arthur blinked. "Problem?" Callie exhaled sharply, giving him a pointed look. "Arthur, why the hell is Jean Ashbluff on the list?" Arthur grinned. Of course, he grinned. Because of course this madman would try recruiting the Prince of Necromancers himself into Ouroboros. Chapter 247, Second Year, 6. Rachel stifled a yawn, stretching her arms over her head as she leaned back in her seat. She'd been holed up in the lounge for the past hour, trying to finish some last-minute assignments. The dull glow of her laptop screen reflected in her tired eyes. Then, out of the corner of her vision, a familiar figure passed by. "Hey, Sarah," Rachel greeted lazily, watching as Serafina moved with her usual quiet grace toward the elevator. Serafina paused just long enough to give her a small nod before continuing on her way. Rachel frowned, shutting her laptop with a soft click. Something about the way Serafina moved seemed a little too purposeful. "Where are you going?" Rachel asked, slipping off the couch and falling into step beside her. "To see Arthur," Serafina answered simply, not even glancing in her direction. Rachel felt her cheeks heat. "This late?" Serafina blinked at her. "And?" Rachel clenched her fists. "Ugh, I really need to be on guard against everyone." She stepped forward just as the elevator doors opened, standing beside Serafina in silent challenge. Serafina arched an elegant brow. "What exactly are you doing?" Rachel flashed her best innocent smile. "Well, I wanted to see Arthur too." There was a beat of silence. Then, Serafina smirked. Competitive, aren't you? Their gazes locked, a silent war of wills playing out between them. You know, Serafina said, voice as smooth as silk, I kissed Arthur. Rachel's eye twitched. So did I. Serafina tilted her head. I held him when he cried. Rachel turned red. Damn it. I straddled him, she blurted out, flustered, and then he got. She trailed off, feeling the heat spread up her neck. She didn't need to finish. The message was clear. Serafina, for the first time, actually looked a little taken aback. Then, she narrowed her eyes. Rachel smirked. Gotcha. The elevator doors slid open, and they marched toward Arthur's room in perfect sync, their competition momentarily put on hold. I have a key, Serafina said smugly. Rachel scoffed. So do I. Without missing a beat, they both scanned their key cards at the same time. The door slid open with a soft whoosh, and both of them froze. Callie stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking supremely unimpressed. Rachel's brain stalled. Why is Callie here? Serafina's eyes narrowed. Why is Callie here? Callie yawned. Geez, can you both not be so damn loud? Rachel's gaze dropped. And immediately shot back up. Callie was standing there, casually wearing Arthur's oversized t-shirt, and nothing else. Rachel could feel Serafina stiffen beside her. A second later, Arthur appeared behind Callie, rubbing a towel through his still damp hair. Oh, it's Rachel and Serafina, he said, sounding only mildly surprised. Serafina's gaze sharpened. Your hair is wet. Yeah, Arthur said, unfazed. I just showered. Rachel forced herself to swallow. And why is Callie wearing your clothes? Callie stretched her arms lazily, not even pretending to be embarrassed. I just showered too. My clothes are being washed. Rachel and Serafina's brains simultaneously short-circuited. Arthur, being Arthur, either didn't notice or chose to ignore their reactions entirely. Anyway, Callie continued, brushing past Arthur toward the bathroom, I'll leave now. Gonna go change. Rachel and Serafina didn't move. The door to the bathroom shut behind Callie, leaving them alone with Arthur. Silence. Rachel and Serafina turned to look at him in perfect synchronization. Arthur sighed, running a hand through his still wet hair. Do you two want to come inside? They exchanged a glance. A brief, unspoken conversation passed between them. Then, without a word, they both stepped inside. Rachel and Serafina exchanged one final glance before their bodies moved in perfect tandem, gold and silver blurs colliding into Arthur with enough force to knock him flat onto the bed. He barely had time to blink before he found himself pinned under both of them. What the ratch? Sarah? His voice was caught somewhere between bafflement and mild panic. What are you doing? Serafina's ice blue eyes narrowed. No more. Rachel's grip on his collar tightened. No more competitors. Arthur stared up at them. What? Serafina crossed her arms. Stop seducing. If you want to do anything, do it with me, nobody else. Rachel blurted out, her voice rising a pitch higher in what was very much not jealousy, absolutely not insecurity, and definitely not possessiveness. At that exact moment, the bathroom door clicked open. Callie stepped inside, now dressed properly. She took one long look at the scene, the two girls sprawled on top of Arthur, his expression caught between confusion and resignation, then exhaled heavily, shook her head, and walked right back out. A thick silence followed. Then, with an almost cartoonish poof, steam practically erupted from Rachel's face as she processed exactly what just happened. Serafina, despite her usual composure, was visibly blushing. Arthur sighed, rubbing his temple as he reached up to gently cup both of their cheeks. I didn't do anything with her, he said, exasperation laced with amusement. Callie and I aren't like that. We were just training, then talking in my room. Rachel pouted, still burning up. Ugh, you're so annoying. She squirmed against him, frustration bubbling over. Just be mine already, damn it. I know we're officially dating, but spend time with me, kiss me, hold me. Okay, just, Arthur groaned, closing his eyes. Just stop bouncing. Rachel suddenly froze. A horrifying realization flickered across her face. Her blush deepened to dangerous levels. Serafina, seeing the exact moment the Saintess connected the dots, smirked, then promptly shoved her off. Rachel yelped as she tumbled to the side, landing in a heap beside Arthur on the bed. What the hell?" she sputtered. Serafina dusted off her sleeves primly. "Cheater." Rachel huffed, crossing her arms with an exaggerated scowl. "So annoying," she muttered, glaring at Serafina like she had personally invented irritation. "I thought Cecilia was the only truly annoying one, but all of you be." She stopped, visibly catching herself. Girls become so insufferable when it comes to Arthur. Arthur's brow twitched. Was she just about to say? Serafina tilted her head, amusement flickering in her ice-blue eyes. "You're more like Cecilia than Rose or me." It was as if someone had set off a nuclear warhead in the room. Rachel stiffened, her shoulders slumping, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Her entire system seemed to momentarily short-circuit. "Why you?" she stammered, voice shaking, fingers curling into fists. "How dare you compare me to that guy?" She inhaled sharply, correcting herself with all the grace of a train derailment. "Which?" Arthur, watching this unfold, felt a very strong urge to pinch the bridge of his nose. "Okay. Yeah. She definitely meant that the first time." Serafina, unbothered, leaned forward, lazily taking Arthur's hand in hers. She rubbed her cheek against it, her voice soft but laced with a possessiveness that made his spine tingle. "We're all like Cecilia when it comes to Arthur." Rachel flinched. "Because," Serafina continued, her fingers lacing between his, "I want Arthur for myself. Only me. Isn't that the same for you?" Rachel's eyes darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. Arthur could almost hear the battle playing out in her head. He wasn't sure whether to feel honored or slightly terrified. "Wow," Luna's voice echoed in his mind, dripping with amusement. "Your harem is looking very interesting already. Just imagine the future when you add even more possessive women." Arthur visibly shuddered. "Hell no. Stop imagining bad things for me." Luna, ever the instigator, let out an amused hum in his mind. "Well, you just remind me of Julius. That boy seduced so many women in his time too." Arthur frowned, rubbing his temple as Serafina and Rachel continued their heated, though entirely predictable, argument in front of him. "Isn't Julius known for only having one wife, though?" "Yes," Luna sighed dramatically. "And that decision almost caused a world war that ended humanity." Arthur blinked. "What?" "Oh, don't worry about it," Luna said with far too much nonchalance for a revelation of that magnitude. "You, on the other hand, are trying to go for the even harder route of keeping all of them together. Risky move, but I respect the ambition." Arthur suddenly had the distinct and terrible image of himself being the cause of an intercontinental magical war because he picked the wrong dance partner. Which, apparently, was exactly what Rachel and Serafina were about to make him do. "Fine," Rachel declared, shaking Serafina's hand with a competitive glint in her eye. "We'll settle this then." Arthur, who had only been half listening because his brain was still buffering from Luna's earlier statement, snapped his attention back to the two girls. "Decide what exactly?" "The sophomore ball," Serafina said simply, as if the answer was obvious. Arthur narrowed his eyes. "And?" "When you danced with the four of us at our birthdays, you made sure everything was equal," Rachel said, her tone practically dripping with disdain. "That won't happen this time. The one who dances with you first wins," Serafina finished, her voice cool and composed as ever. Arthur stared at them both, deadpan. This is stupid. Neither of them seemed to care. Rachel grinned victoriously, as if she had already won. Serafina merely adjusted the sleeve of her t-shirt, as if the outcome was already set in stone. And before Arthur could begin to argue about the ridiculous nature of this contest, both of them turned on their heels and strode out of his room, leaving him alone in stunned silence. A heavy sigh escaped his lips. Harem ending denied, Luna commented dryly. Shut up. Chapter 248, Sophomore Ball, 1. After the declaration of war, because that's what it felt like, by Serafina and Rachel, the situation had somehow escalated further. Naturally, Cecilia and Rose had thrown their hats into the ring as well, because of course they had. And so, the four of them had spent the following days locked in a silent, unspoken Cold War, each one making sure the others didn't get an unfair advantage. The result? I didn't technically have a date to the sophomore ball. I should not be worried, right? I thought, adjusting my tie as I finished getting ready. The knock at my door interrupted that train of thought. I opened it, only to be met with a head of deep navy blue hair and an expression that screamed, I have better things to do than be here. Clana Lopez, the headmaster's daughter. She was wearing a sleek, midnight blue dress, her usual messy bun replaced with a loose, wavy hairstyle that softened her usual sharp features. Not that she looked particularly interested in any of it. Just bored like usual. Hey. You ready? She asked, folding her arms as if this were a completely normal conversation and not an increasingly surreal situation. Yeah, but why are you here? I asked, already sensing the answer would be something ridiculous. Clana exhaled, already looking exhausted. I was told, she stressed the word with clear exasperation, to be your date on paper so that you don't seduce any other girls. I blinked. What? Clana yawned, as if this entire thing was barely worth her effort. Come on, let's go. I followed her, my brain still catching up to the sheer absurdity of what I'd just heard. How the hell did they convince her? So, I said as we made our way downstairs. What exactly is your plan for the night? I'm not dancing with you, obviously, she said flatly. I'm too tired for that and I actually care about my life. I'll just be making sure no stray girls get their claws into you. There is absolutely no need to go that far, I sighed, rubbing my temple. Anyway, you look really pretty tonight, Clana. Your dress suits you so well. Like a mermaid. She side-eyed me before muttering, looking at you, I can already tell they made the right choice. I raised a brow. What's that supposed to mean? Clana stopped at the bottom of the stairs, turned to me, and squinted, as if debating whether or not I was being serious. Then, in the most exasperated tone imaginable, she said, You do realize you're the problem, right? I frowned. How am I the problem? She pointed at me. You exist. That's a bit harsh. No, it's not. She rubbed her temples. You go around being all mysterious and powerful and nice, and somehow you make it look effortless. And then you have the audacity to say things like, she deepened her voice in a bad impression of me, oh, you look really pretty tonight, Clana. Your dress suits you so well. Like a mermaid. I blinked. I mean, you do look nice tonight. She groaned. See? That is why I understand why they sent me. I was just being honest. I defended. Clana gave me a long, judgmental stare before shaking her head. You're that kind of innocently flirty. The kind that doesn't even realize what they're doing. You just exist, and women around you lose their minds. It's honestly terrifying. I understand though. I paused. That can't be true. Clana folded her arms. Do I look like I'm joking? No, I admitted. She huffed, muttering something under her breath about ridiculous protagonist energy, before sighing heavily. Anyway, I'll just say this now, try to survive tonight. That bad? The four of them, she said, raising an unimpressed brow. You have no idea what they're capable of when it comes to you. A chill ran down my spine. I nodded slowly. Noted. She gave me one last assessing look before stepping ahead. Come on, the limo's waiting downstairs. I followed her, stepping into the sleek black car waiting outside, feeling, for some reason, like I was being driven to my own execution. Anyway, I don't mind doing this, Clana said, eyeing me with something between amusement and resignation. After all, an unworthy girl like me can only be with someone like you when something like this happens. I sighed. Can you stop joking? She exhaled dramatically. I wish I was joking. Then she glanced out the window, the lights of the city flashing in her dark blue eyes. You're in for a very long night. Rose is still tame, but the three princesses. She actually shuddered. I raised an eyebrow. You make it sound like I'm about to enter a battlefield. That's because you are, she said, dead serious. Then, with a sudden squint, she turned her gaze on me. I still don't understand how you managed this. What kind of brainwashing did you do to get all of them like that? No brainwashing, I said dryly. I guess they just like me that much. Clana groaned. That's true, but it's really annoying to hear you say it, so sure of yourself. I smirked, but before I could respond, she jabbed a finger at me. Just remember, don't talk to any other girls, okay? I blinked. I don't talk to many girls anyway. That was true. Other than small talk or necessary interactions, I wasn't exactly the type to go out of my way to start conversations with others. I didn't have that much of an open personality. Clana snorted. Well, they won't approach you with me around, which is my role basically. Only those four will, to rip you to pieces. She leaned back into the seat, stretching. This sophomore ball is going to be so much fun. I couldn't tell if she was being sarcastic. The limo slowed to a stop. A second later, the door opened, and the cool night air hit us as we stepped out onto the red carpet. The flash of cameras, AI-controlled and precisely angled for optimal captures, lit up the scene in rapid bursts. Clana hooked her arm through mine, her posture effortlessly composed, as if she were just fulfilling a casual obligation. I guess they gave you some leeway? I asked. She yawned. Yeah. Don't get too used to it. We moved forward, past the sea of flashing lights, past the hushed murmurs of students watching from the sides. Then, finally, we entered the venue. Inside, chandeliers shimmered like galaxies overhead, their soft golden glow casting a warm haze over the extravagant ballroom. The entire space was filled with elegant decorations, floating orbs gently illuminating the corners, enchanted flowers shifting colors in response to the mood of the evening, a grand stage at the far end where music played in smooth, refined harmonies from the speakers. It was every bit as breathtaking as expected, even more than the freshman ball in all honesty. And then... All right, get out now, Clana, a voice said. Clana barely hesitated. She unhooked her arm from mine and retreated without complaint, waving lazily over her shoulder. Try not to die, she yawned before disappearing into the crowd. In her place, as if materializing from thin air, stood Cecilia. She was wearing a crimson dress, one that matched the deep red of her eyes, the fabric hugging her figure just enough to leave an impression without being too revealing. Her golden hair cascaded down her back like molten sunlight, catching the light as she moved. She smiled, a mix of amusement and satisfaction playing at the corners of her lips. Hi, Arthur, she said smoothly, her voice warm, her fingers already looping through my arm as she pulled me closer. Hey, Cecilia, I greeted, a small smile tugging at my lips. Before she could lead me anywhere, however, my other arm was claimed. Stop tricking, Serafina's voice was calm, but the grip on my arm was not. Cecilia's expression twitched. Just when I managed to shake off that annoying saintess, she muttered under her breath, her fingers tightening slightly around my wrist. Serafina, standing in an ice blue gown that complemented her silver hair perfectly, simply gazed at her, impassive. And just when I thought I wouldn't have to deal with you first, she countered. The tension between them crackled like static. I sighed. The night had only just begun. Chapter 249, Sophomore Ball, 2. Arthur had precisely zero control over the situation. One arm trapped in Cecilia's iron grip, the other held hostage by Serafina. Two princesses, one goal, his absolute and total possession. Arthur is going to dance with me, Serafina declared, her silver gaze glinting with quiet certainty. Cecilia scoffed, rolling her crimson eyes. Ha! Dream on. As if that would ever happen for someone like you, Ice Princess. Serafina's fingers tightened. At least I don't treat people like toys, which? Both of you, stop fighting, Arthur tried, attempting to yank his arms free. Futile effort. Cecilia and Serafina weren't just strong, they were stubborn. But before either of them could escalate further, Arthur vanished. A blink. A shift. A warp. The grand hall disappeared in a swirl of mana. And when the world reformed, Arthur found himself somewhere completely different, his head resting comfortably on something soft. A lap. Hee, you're here now, a familiar, smug voice giggled. Arthur blinked up to see Rachel, sapphire eyes gleaming mischievously, fingers already reaching up to pinch his nose. Ratch? Arthur coughed, jerking upright. Where are we? Outside, she answered far too happily. Arthur took a second to register his surroundings. The cool night air, the gentle sway of enchanted lanterns floating above them, the quiet hum of the distant ballroom music. A rooftop, just on the outskirts of the venue. And then, the final puzzle piece clicked. You used one of the 7 circle mages from the Creighton family, he muttered, realization dawning. Rachel beamed. Of course. Ever since the demon attack during the midterms, the second-year students had been assigned elite protection. Each of the superpowers, the Creighton family, Slate Mark Empire, Mount Hua sect, and the Ash Bluff family, had sent 2 ascendant-rank mages to act as unseen guardians. Apparently, Rachel had commandeered one of them. After all, Rachel continued sweetly, I'm a princess. And the saintess. Am I not the best? Arthur stared at her, bewildered. You just. Anyway, Rachel interrupted, completely ignoring his attempt at reason, you look so handsome today. Her sapphire eyes shone, taking him in, her smile turning from playful to something softer, something more dangerous. You're so perfect for me, Arthur. 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 Her voice was growing breathier, as if just saying his name was enough to make her dizzy. Arthur swallowed. Do you like the view? She teased, tilting her head, her face now very close to his. Arthur's eyes flickered away on instinct. Ratch. So cute. Rachel thought gleefully, watching him struggle. Dance with me, she whispered, fingers tracing absent circles against his sleeve. I'll win. Ratch, Arthur started, once again attempting the futile thing known as reason. And then the air changed. Heat. A rush of mana. A deep, rich crimson flooded the rooftop, saturating the space in Cecilia's unmistakable aura. The rooftop tiles beneath them cracked, energy pulsing outward in a slow, suffocating wave. Arthur turned, already sighing in exasperation. Rachel, however, did not sigh. Her expression hardened. A flicker of light, a glimmer of divine gold, and in an instant, wings unfurled from her back, spanning out in a display of pure celestial brilliance. With a single pulse, the oppressive crimson mana was purified, washed away in radiant light. Rachel's sapphire eyes turned cold. Annoying witch, she muttered. The rooftop crackled under the weight of their mana signatures clashing. Both of you, stop, Arthur started, stepping forward, already preparing to de-escalate. But before he could, another mana presence entered the scene. A new one. A dangerous one. A knight landed on the rooftop. He was tall, clad in the silver and navy uniform of the Slate Mark Empire, his presence exuding raw, disciplined power. And in his grip, a sword infused with astral energy. Arthur froze. What the actual fuck? Cecilia stood just behind him, a satisfied smirk curling on her lips. Luke. Rachel snapped, her voice sharp. Arthur's thoughts derailed. Cecilia brought an Imperial Knight into this? Is she actually insane? And he was currently swinging an astral blade down toward them. Arthur's instincts flared. He moved, but before he could act, another presence interrupted. A sharp collision. A violent clash of mana. The Imperial Knight's astral blade was halted mid-air, stopped by a countering force just as powerful. Arthur exhaled. Cecilia clicked her tongue, barely hiding her irritation as the Creighton Seven-Circle Mage stepped forward. Your Highness Rachel, I apologize for my delay, Luke said with a stiff bow, his voice laced with formality. But... Shut it, Rachel cut him off, waving a hand dismissively. I told you, don't worry about it. Arthur exhaled sharply, feeling the tension tighten like a noose around his neck. He could already see where this was going. Rachel, Cecilia, stop, he said, raising his hands in what he hoped was a gesture of peace. It wasn't. Both girls turned their attention to him like a pair of predators who had just spotted fresh prey. Both of you are being, Arthur started, only to be rudely interrupted by the sudden, overpowering scent of honey. The air shifted. Soft petals, light as whispers, drifted from nowhere. Plum blossoms. Arthur's shoulders sagged. Oh, for the love of... Before he could even register what was happening, slender arms wrapped around him from behind, a warm breath ghosting against his ear. Hello, Serafina whispered. Arthur barely had a second to react before she took off, lifting him effortlessly into the air. He groaned. Loudly. Can I finish a goddamn sentence for once in my life? This was getting ridiculous. Mine, Serafina declared, holding him possessively as they soared above the ballroom. Arthur didn't need to see the chaos below to feel it. He could sense Cecilia's mana crackling like a storm left behind. He could practically hear Rachel's indignant rage from here. And now, the unmistakable pressure of another mana signature loomed nearby. Arthur craned his neck and sighed. A Mount Hua Elder. Fantastic. A Seven-Circle Mage. An Imperial Knight. And now, an Elder. Sarah, he muttered, his voice strained. Are you seriously using your family's elders just to steal me from a dance? Serafina's grip didn't loosen. If anything, she held him closer. I am a princess, she said, as if that explained everything. Their loss if they try to stop me. Arthur rubbed his temples. You do realize disciplinary action is a thing, right? Serafina just shrugged, her expression unreadable. They wouldn't dare. And even if they did, she turned to face him fully, ice-blue eyes glinting under the moonlight, it would be worth it. Arthur inhaled sharply, suddenly very aware of just how close she was. The cool night breeze sent strands of silver hair fluttering, reflecting the soft glow of the stars. She looked almost unreal. Ethereal. It was the only word for her. For all of them, really. Each of them, Serafina, Rachel, Cecilia, Rose, were impossibly beautiful, terrifyingly strong, and far, far too intelligent for his own good. Men would kill to be in his position. Yet here he was, completely trapped in the middle of their personal war over him. And, if he was being honest, he didn't blame them. Arthur was many things, calculating, strategic, a near genius when it came to battle. But when it came to this? To love, to relationships, to whatever this absolute mess was? He was naive. Because as much as he wanted them, he didn't want to share them. And he knew, deep down, in the very pit of his soul, that they felt the same way about him. That was the real problem. Sarah, Arthur started, forcing himself to break the silence. Seraphina tilted her head, waiting. But before he could get a single word out. Roses. Blue roses. They bloomed around them in an instant, flooding the air with their unmistakable fragrance. Arthur knew what was coming before it even happened. Oh, for the... And just like that, he disappeared again. The next thing he knew, he was falling, or rather, landing. His vision blurred momentarily before settling, and the first thing he saw was a familiar shade of auburn. Then, warmth. Then, fingers in his hair. Then, a voice, soft and utterly pleased. "Hi," Rose greeted, her tone so casual it was almost insulting. Arthur blinked. He was in her lap. "Rose." He exhaled, dragging a hand down his face. "You too." She tilted her head innocently, running her fingers through his hair as if this were a completely normal situation. "What?" she said. "I waited my turn." Arthur groaned. "You kidnapped me right out of Seraphina's arms." Rose just smiled, completely unbothered. "She kidnapped you first." Arthur opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing for that. No counter. No argument. Nothing. Rose grinned at his silence. "See? You get it now." Arthur dropped his head back onto her lap, staring at the sky, utterly defeated. This night wasn't even close to being over. Chapter 250, Sophomore Ball, 3. Arthur sighed, the weight of the entire evening pressing down on him like an unshakable burden. He lay there, head in Rose's lap, staring up at the soft glow of the venue's chandeliers filtering through the trees. He had just been yanked through a full-scale royal skirmish, his existence fought over like some kind of mythical artifact, and now Rose was casually patting his head as if he were a particularly exhausted cat. "Arthur," she said, voice gentle, "you feel bad about this, right?" He exhaled slowly. "Yeah." She hummed thoughtfully, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns through his hair. "I get it," she said, nodding to herself. "It's because you think it's unfair." Arthur glanced up at her. "It is unfair." "Is it?" Rose tilted her head, considering. "I don't think it is. I mean, each of us has our own unique advantage, you know." Arthur blinked. "Unique advantage?" "Emicham." Rose's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Cecilia is sexy and seductive. Rachel is energetic and seductive. Seraphina is icy and seductive." Arthur frowned. "Why does seductive keep showing up?" Rose chuckled, the sound light and teasing. "Because all three of them are super possessive over you." She tapped his forehead playfully. "They don't even realize how much." Arthur groaned, dragging a hand down his face. "Gods above." "Exactly," Rose said, laughing. "Meanwhile, I'm different. I like you just as much as they do, but I don't get possessive like the princesses." She stretched her arms behind her head, eyes twinkling with something he couldn't quite place. "So, that's my advantage." Arthur turned his head slightly to look at her properly. "You're saying not being possessive is your strength?" Rose grinned. "Think about it." Her fingers brushed against his temple, slow and deliberate. "I'm not as elegant as Seraphina, not as bold as Cecilia, and I don't have Rachel's, heat." She hesitated, cheeks tinging pink for the first time that night before quickly recovering, "but I have something none of them do." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "I want you to be happy," Rose said simply. "Not just with me. Just, happy." Arthur froze. Rose smiled softly, leaning down slightly so that her face was just above his. "If being with all four of us makes you happy, then I want that too." Her gaze held his, unwavering, steady. "As long as you're smiling, as long as you're happy, that's enough for me." Arthur's throat felt tight. No one had ever said something like that to him before. "You think the others don't see it the same way?" he asked after a moment, his voice quieter than before. Rose sighed, shaking her head slightly. They do, she admitted, but not in the same way. She lifted a hand, scratching her cheek, clearly choosing her next words carefully. I know them well enough to tell you this. They want you to be happy, but they want to be the only reason you're happy. Her lips pressed into a small, wry smile. Because they're perfect princesses, they've never had to think otherwise. They don't realize that happiness doesn't work that way. Arthur stared at her. She met his gaze, unflinching. And just like that, everything clicked. She understood. Not just the situation. Not just him. She understood all of them. And that, in itself, was terrifying. But they can, Rose nodded, her fingers still tracing absent-minded circles against Arthur's temple. Since they want you to be happy, I believe they'll get there. They just might push the boundaries a bit first. Arthur sighed, though there was a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. That's one way to put it. Rose hummed in agreement, then tilted her head slightly. They're used to getting what they want, Arthur. And what they want, her fingers moved to lightly pinch his cheek, is you. Arthur winced, rubbing the spot. I noticed. She laughed softly, the sound warm and familiar. You'll survive. He gave her a look. Will I? Her smile widened. Probably. Arthur shook his head, amused despite himself. You're too mature about this. Well, someone has to be. Rose grinned. And besides. Her voice dipped, her touch lingering just a second longer. I want you too, Arthur. The words were quiet but certain. There was no teasing in them, no game. Just a truth spoken simply. Arthur swallowed. Then, before he could say anything, Rose leaned in. A soft brush of lips, a feather-light warmth pressing against his own. The world seemed to still for a moment, her breath mingling with his. Then, just as quickly, she pulled back, a playful glint in her eyes. Do you like my lap pillow? She whispered. Arthur blinked, still processing. What? I know it's not like Rachel's, she continued, voice light, teasing. You don't have to lie. Arthur scoffed. Doesn't matter. Oh. Rose raised an eyebrow. It's yours, Arthur said simply. And I like you. For the first time that night, Rose's composure cracked. A flush bloomed across her cheeks, spreading down to the tips of her ears. Then, in a very un-Rose-like moment, she actually giggled. You're too charming for your own good, she muttered, tilting her head to the side as if to hide her expression. Arthur smirked. I'm just telling the truth. That's the problem, she sighed dramatically. You make it too easy to fall for you. Arthur chuckled, relaxing slightly. Good. Rose huffed, but there was no real annoyance behind it. Just warmth. Underscore 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 underscore. Cecilia stared at Nate, the Imperial Knight, with the patience of someone who knew they would get their way in the end. Find him, she said, voice sweet but laced with steel. Nate hesitated. Your Highness, we are in Mythos Academy, he tried, though his tone lacked any real conviction. Cecilia blinked. Then, she smiled. It was a dazzling thing, bright and warm, the kind of smile that could make hearts race and kingdoms kneel. It was also terrifying. Still smiling, she made a small slicing motion across her neck, her crimson eyes never once breaking contact with Nate's own. The Imperial Knight sighed, shoulders slumping. He didn't need words to understand the threat. He looked at Luke, the seven-circle mage from the Creighton family. Their gazes met, and a silent conversation passed between them. You too? Yeah. Damn. Gotta work for the merits. But still. Nate exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose before activating his senses. An ascendant ranker like him could find anyone in the academy, gift or no gift. And sure enough, there. A ripple of mana, faint but distinct. The mage sensed it too. They shared another glance. Then, without another word, both of them moved, leaving trails of raw mana in their wake as they shot forward. Behind them, Cecilia and Rachel followed, their presence more like a gathering storm than a pair of teenage girls chasing their shared boyfriend. Sorry about this, Nate muttered as he swung his astral blade, his tone resigned. Don't worry, Luke replied as he blocked it with a flick of his staff. I get it. Nate gave him a grateful nod. Neither of them wanted to be doing this, but when the princesses gave an order, the only thing worse than obeying was not obeying. Ahead of them, the air shifted, the scent of flowers thickening. The world itself seemed to ripple, blue petals floating unnaturally through the air. Supernatural, Luke murmured, eyes narrowing. Nate nodded grimly. They had found Rose. Just as they prepared to move, another powerful presence descended. The Mount Hua elder landed gracefully, his robes barely disturbed by the wind. The three men, knight, mage, and elder, shared a look. Then, without hesitation, they attacked each other. The air split as their weapons clashed. The sheer force of their blows cracked the earth, sending arcs of mana rippling through the field of blue flowers. Every strike was careful, controlled. None of them wanted to be the one responsible for actual destruction. This was a contest of superiority, not a real battle. Or at least, it was. Until someone stepped between them. Nate's eyes widened as his sword came down. A flash of movement, effortless, precise. Parried. The strike that should have landed was deflected with almost insulting ease. On his other side, Luke's staff was knocked off course, forced back before the spell could fully form. And the Mount Hua elder? He had stopped moving entirely, his gaze fixed on the one who had interrupted them. Arthur. Arthur, standing calmly in the middle of three ascendant rankers, looking vaguely annoyed. For a split second, none of them moved. Then, reality crashed back down on them all at once. Luke felt the weight of a presence behind him, Erebus, the Lich, standing ominously at Arthur's back. A flicker of mana, a silent promise of retaliation. Nate gritted his teeth, adjusting his stance. He could break out of this, easily. Any of them could. But they wouldn't. Not because Arthur had overpowered them. But because of the simple, undeniable fact that hurting him, the boy who had somehow bewitched not one, not two, but three princesses, was equivalent to signing their own death warrants. Their lives were already difficult enough. No need to add execution by royalty to the list. Chapter 251, Sophomore Ball, 4. Eva rested her head against her palm, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the polished wood of her desk. Her expression was unreadable, calm on the surface, but with an unmistakable weight pressing behind her gaze. Before her stood four of the most powerful and troublesome young women in the academy. Behind them, three adults who should have known better. And at the center of it all, the boy who had somehow caused this particular brand of chaos. The dispute hadn't gone unnoticed. Of course it hadn't. There were limits to what even princesses could get away with, and this crossed several of them. She had hoped, prayed, for a quiet evening. But no. Instead, she got this. Eva exhaled slowly, eyes sharp as she addressed them. Tell me, princesses, do you not regret your actions? Silence. Do you believe yourselves above discipline? above me? Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority, pressing down like a force of nature. Do you truly think you can do whatever you want in my academy? The violet in her eyes gleamed, pure light, coiled and waiting. It wasn't just for show. There were very few people in the world who could use pure light to its full potential. She was one of them. Rachel, to her credit, didn't hesitate. No, she said simply, shaking her head. Eva's brow twitched. Then why? Because for all their arrogance, for all their status, none of them were stupid. They knew the rules. They knew the line between privilege and blatant abuse of power. And yet they had crossed it anyway. Arthur, Cecilia said, her voice unwavering. I need him, for myself. Serafina nodded in agreement. Rachel's eyes glinted dangerously, as if she was seconds away from making her own claim more aggressively. Meanwhile, Rose sighed, rubbing her temples as though she had long since given up trying to rein in the insanity. Eva narrowed her eyes and turned to Arthur. All right. The four of you, out. Her tone left no room for argument. I'll talk to him. A chorus of objections immediately followed. Don't punish him. All four girls said it in perfect unison, the sheer force of their plea momentarily rendering Eva speechless. Her brow twitched again. Out. Her voice cracked like a whip. With much reluctance, and more than a few glares exchanged between them, the girls finally left, filing out one by one. The doors shut behind them, leaving only Arthur standing in the now eerily silent office. Eva sighed. She leaned back in her chair, watching the boy in front of her. He stood straight, composed, but there was a flicker of wariness in his eyes. Good. At least he had the sense to be aware of the situation. She studied him for a moment longer. What an incredible boy, she thought. Intelligent, absurdly talented, and, perhaps most dangerously of all, capable of wrapping four powerful women around his fingers without even trying. Or maybe because he wasn't trying. The princesses weren't fools. They knew the risks. And yet, they had still done this. For him. That alone spoke volumes. She exhaled. She was going to need a drink after this. You are certainly beyond ambitious, Eva said, her voice dry as she leaned back in her chair. 3 princesses and a count's daughter? At the same time? Do you have a death wish, or are you just exceptionally stupid? No, Arthur said, shaking his head. Shame, she sighed. It would be easier to believe if you were just an idiot. Arthur stayed silent. There wasn't much to say. Eva rubbed her temples, exhaling slowly. This is annoying, you know. I agreed to let the 7 superpowers each send 2 ascendant rankers to protect their children because it was a good deal for the academy. It improved security. It made things more stable. Now, thanks to you, I have a reason to expel them all. She fixed him with a sharp look. Or, at the very least, drastically reduce their number. Because it turns out these guardians of theirs are more than willing to bow and scrape for their young masters and mistresses. I was under the impression that they had some backbone. That illusion has been thoroughly shattered. Arthur said nothing. Eva sighed again, but when she spoke again, her voice had softened, if only slightly. I'm not blaming you, Arthur. You're just a boy, and they're just young girls. You were all born into power and expectation, and none of you were ever really given the choice to just be normal. But power, even unasked for, comes with responsibility. And right now, whether you like it or not, you have a lot of power. He knew that. He had known that from the moment he realized what his presence did to them. 3 princesses. A count's daughter. All of them tied to him, all of them willing to wield their family's influence and might in the pursuit of his affection. 3 of the 7 superpowers of the world had daughters hopelessly entangled in their love for him. A future archwitch. A future saintess. A future frozen plum blossom swordsman. A future master mage. All for him. It was ridiculous. And it was dangerous. This, Eva said, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the chaos that had unfolded earlier, is proof of what happens when that much influence isn't handled properly. They literally used their family's ascendant rankers, warriors who should be standing guard against assassins, protecting their nations, just to catch you and secure your love. Her lips curled in something between amusement and mild horror. If they could, they would already have you locked up in a gilded cage. Arthur blinked. Eva shuddered. And the worst part is, they could. That's the terrifying thing. If they pushed hard enough, if they weren't afraid of consequences, if they thought you'd accept it in the end, they have the power to do it. Arthur stared at her. I don't think they'd. Eva raised a brow. Would you have thought they'd use their own ascendant rankers before tonight? Would you have thought they'd bend the rules of the academy just to chase you down in the middle of a ball? Arthur hesitated. Eva nodded. Exactly. She sighed again, brushing a stray strand of navy blue hair behind her ear. Power makes people willful. The more powerful a girl is, the less she's used to being denied anything. And those 3 princesses? They've never had to accept a no in their lives. Not until you. And now they want you. They love you. And they don't share. She gave him a look, one that was equal parts impressed, exasperated, and something dangerously close to pity. And you, Arthur, managed to make all of them fall for you at once. She shook her head, leaning back in her chair. Frankly, I'm amazed you've survived this long. What should I do then? Arthur asked, rubbing his temples as if that might somehow massage a solution into his brain. Eva gave him a look. The kind of look reserved for tired mentors dealing with particularly troublesome prodigies. Satisfy all of them fully. Arthur choked on air. Excuse me? The 3 princesses want to possess you, Eva continued, utterly unfazed. Rose doesn't, because she actually understands that you love all 4 of them equally. So what you need to do is satisfy the 3 to the point where they start prioritizing your happiness and love over their possessiveness. Arthur opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Nothing came out. Eva sighed. Look, the reason they're possessive isn't just because of their upbringing. It's human nature, twisted by expectation, by their insane levels of infatuation with you, and, let's be honest, by how obscenely well you charm them. It's part normal desire, part crazy in love madness. This isn't something you can fix overnight. It's not even something you should try to fix overnight. Arthur slumped back in his chair, pressing a hand to his face. Why does this sound like a battle strategy? Eva smirked. Because it is a battle strategy. Just one fought with emotions instead of swords. Which, frankly, makes it much harder. Arthur groaned. But, Eva said, and her voice softened slightly, if this is the path you want to take, then commit to it. Love them. Love all of them. Properly. Arthur stared at her. She's right, Luna chimed in from the depths of his mind. That is the path to the harem route. Arthur nearly jumped. What the hell, who even taught you to think like that? Luna didn't respond. Eva watched him with something that almost resembled sympathy. Almost. All right, she said, stretching as if shaking off her exhaustion. I won't take any disciplinary action. Yet. Because I trust that you'll figure this out before I have to. But, Arthur. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, and her gaze was knowing. Amused. Almost pitying. Please start taking the steps toward your happy ending before this escalates any further. Because right now, you're heading for a scenario that ends with the entire world under your control. Arthur gave her a flat look. Bit dramatic, don't you think? Eva exhaled, long and suffering. I don't think I am. Arthur's eye twitched. I really don't have world domination aspirations, I swear. Sure, Eva muttered. We'll see how long that lasts. She stood up, stretching out her shoulders, before pausing. Oh, And one last thing, just please don't add Clanna to this mess. My daughter is too lazy to handle those wolves. Arthur scoffed. I'm not doing this intentionally. Eva gave him a look. Chapter 252, Prelude to Second Mission, 1. After the sophomore ball ended and my conversation with the headmaster left me staring down the reality of my choices, I found myself thinking. What did I really want? This second chance at life, something that someone like me had been given. Something I didn't deserve. Survival wasn't enough. Strength wasn't enough. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to feel human. Because in my last life, I had never been anything more than a tool, something people fought over, something meant to be used, sharpened, wielded. A genius whose value was determined by how many hands reached out to claim him. But I was not a thing to be owned. I was not a prize to be fought over. I wanted to live. To carve out a place in this world that was entirely my own. Originality. The proof that I existed. I needed that. So even if they didn't understand now, I would make them. Over time, I would teach them, Rachel, Cecilia, Serafina. Because they had helped me prove myself, helped me see that my life was my own. And they were not people I wanted to be without. But they needed to understand. I stepped out of Eva's office to find the three princesses waiting for me, flanked by their ascendant rank guards. Rose stood apart from them, not restrained, not part of their silent battle for control. I moved toward her. Not a glance spared for Rachel, Cecilia, or Serafina. I could feel their eyes boring into me. The weight of their expectations, their unspoken claims. I have been too passive. Because I liked them, I wanted to accommodate them. I had hoped they would change. But people don't change on their own. Not unless you force them to. I stopped before Rose, knelt, and took her hand in mine. Will you offer me this dance? I asked, bringing my lips to the back of her hand in a light kiss. Her breath caught. Behind me, Serafina made a sound, something caught between disbelief and protest. Arthur. Are you choosing Rose? Cecilia asked, her voice sharp. I closed my eyes. Then, I met their gazes. No, I said. I like all four of you. Equally. Silence. Heavy. But for tonight, for this little competition, I choose to dance with Rose first. Rachel looked stricken. Cecilia's fingers twitched, as if resisting the urge to snatch me back. Serafina's lips parted slightly, but no words came. I felt a pang in my chest. I hated seeing them like this. But I had to be firm. I hardened my expression, my voice turning cold. I am not something you can have just because you want to, I said, letting the words settle. If you want me to express the love I feel for you freely, then earn it. Show me that you understand. I turned, leading Rose away. None of them stopped me. Not this time. Once we were out of earshot, Rose let out a quiet laugh. Wow. I can't believe you actually did that. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. I didn't want to, but I had to. I had to make them understand that I won't tolerate that kind of behavior from them. Even if, I hesitated. Even if they decide to break up with me because of it. Rose tilted her head. You're not afraid? I met her gaze and smiled. I know they won't. She let out a breath, shaking her head. Very confident, aren't you, Arthur? You tell me. Rose grinned and stepped closer, wrapping her arms around me in a loose embrace. Well, since I win, she murmured, that means I get your time tonight, right? That was the deal, I said. She took my hand, leading me into the gardens. And there, beneath the quiet glow of the moonlight, we danced. Anyway, I feel happy now, Rose murmured as we swayed together in the quiet, her voice carrying a softness that settled deep in my chest. Dancing with you makes me so happy. I'm glad, I said, twirling her, watching as moonlight caught in her hair, painting it in silver blue hues. "But, isn't the staff going to catch us?" she asked, suddenly wary. I raised a brow. "You worry about that now?" She flushed, looking away. I wanted to do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "With you." I smirked. "Knew it." I pulled her closer, our bodies aligning perfectly as we slowed. "So, you're mine?" Her crimson eyes gleamed as she met my gaze. "Of course." The dance ended, but neither of us moved apart. The air between us was warm, charged with something unspoken but undeniable. I leaned in. And then our lips met, soft and certain, like the pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Rose melted into the kiss, her fingers curling into the fabric of my suit as if to anchor herself. When we finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, her breath mingling with mine in the cool night air. "I will give everything to you if you ask for it," she whispered, her voice laced with devotion. "Even Vakert." I brushed my thumb over her cheek, my touch light but firm. "I don't want Vakert," I told her. "I want you." "You already have me," she murmured. And then she kissed me again. This was the warmth I had always been searching for. The warmth I wanted from all of them. The warmth that, together, would shape my originality. That would make me human. That would make me breathe and live. And to protect this, to protect the warmth I had found in my life, with the 4 girls who had woven themselves into my existence, with my family. I would do anything. Even if it meant tearing apart the 5 cults. Even if it meant crushing the future calamities before they ever had a chance to rise. Underscore 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 underscore. Rachel clenched her fists so tightly her nails dug into her palms, but she barely registered the sting. Her breath hitched, uneven, as her mind spiraled into a chaos she couldn't control. Arthur doesn't like me the most. The thought echoed, a dull, crushing weight settling deep in her chest. Her shoulders trembled. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. "I even bought this dress." She looked down at the glittering fabric, at the delicate embroidery she had chosen with care, at the way it hugged her figure, crafted for one purpose. To entice him. She had wanted him to look at her, to hold her close, to whisper something just for her. To prove that she wasn't just another contender in this impossible game. But he picked Rose. Her breath shuddered out of her lungs. "Does that mean I bother him?" Her throat tightened, an awful, suffocating sensation. "He doesn't want me? He doesn't love me?" Her mind recoiled at the thought, but once it had lodged itself there, it refused to leave. "He doesn't want to hug me? He doesn't want to kiss me?" A sharp inhale. Her vision blurred. "But, no, I remember how he looks at me." Her fingers pressed against her lips. "I remember the way his gaze lingers, the way his breath catches. He likes me. He must like me." But doubt clawed at her. Or is that just how boys are? Her stomach twisted violently. Is it just a biological response? Not love? Not me? The thought made her want to scream. Could it be, he liked me before, but not anymore? Did I scare him away? Her body swayed slightly. She felt weightless, like she was slipping off the edge of something she couldn't name. "I'm going to lose Arthur." Her fingers dug into her arms. I'm going to lose Arthur. Her breath came faster, shallow and desperate. I'm going to lose Arthur. I'm going to lose Arthur. I'm going to lose Arthur. The words pounded through her skull, each repetition like a hammer against fragile glass. And then, something inside her cracked. She couldn't lose him. Not now. Not ever. Arthur had shown her hope, a future beyond being just a saintess shackled to some nameless hero. He had shown her that she was human, that she could want things, that she had the right to want things. She couldn't go back. She wouldn't go back. Tears burned at the edges of her vision. Her hands shook as she forced herself to stand, swaying on unsteady feet. Luke stepped forward, concern flickering across his face. Rachel didn't let him speak. She snapped her fingers, and the teleportation circle flared beneath her, swallowing her whole in a burst of golden light. The moment she landed in her room, her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the bed, her limbs tangled in the expensive fabric of her dress. She didn't care. She buried her face in the pillows, muffling the quiet, broken sobs that clawed their way out of her throat. Because she was going to lose the person she loved. Chapter 253, Prelude to Second Mission, 2. Serafina stared blankly at the distant horizon, but she wasn't really looking at anything. The world around her felt muted, muffled, as if she were standing behind a thick sheet of glass. Is he leaving me too? The thought settled in her chest, an unbearable weight pressing down on her ribs, making it hard to breathe. Her life had been built on cold expectations and rigid duty. A princess born into perfection, given everything she could ever need, except love. Her mother had once cradled her in warmth, had brushed fingers through her hair, whispered words that made her feel safe. And then, one day, that warmth was gone. Replaced by silence. By distance. By a father who saw her not as a daughter, but as a symbol, an heir to be sculpted into something untouchable, unbreakable. Serafina had learned to endure. She had learned to swallow the loneliness, to stand perfectly poised, to never show that her heart was nothing more than an empty, aching wound. She had convinced herself that she didn't need love. That it was an illusion. A weakness. Until Arthur. Arthur, who had cracked through her cold walls without hesitation. Arthur, who had reached out his hand and, without expecting anything in return, stayed. Arthur, who had risked everything for her, not because she was a princess, not because she was powerful, but because she was her. And she had clung to him like a lifeline, so desperate for his warmth that she had gripped too tightly. And now I can't even love him without wanting to possess him. Her hands curled into fists, her nails biting into her skin. Is this why he's slipping away? She had thought she was strong. That she had conquered her loneliness. That with Arthur by her side, she was whole. But the truth was bitter, sharp as a blade pressed against her throat. She was still that little girl, reaching for hands that would never hold her. I'm losing him. The realization made her stomach churn, nausea rising in her throat. Arthur had chosen Rose tonight. Not her. And it wasn't just about a dance. It was proof that she wasn't enough. Serafina's breath came unsteady, her fingers trembling as she tried to keep herself from falling apart. No. No, I won't lose him. She had been given everything in life except for love. Now that she had found it, she refused to let it slip through her fingers. But how? If she tightened her grip, would he resent her? If she let go, would he leave? What was she supposed to do? She felt something hot drip onto her hands. Tears. Serafina Zenith, the unshakable ice princess, was crying. Her breathing turned uneven, and she pressed her hands to her face, trying to stop herself from shattering completely. Arthur, tell me what I need to do. Because for the first time in her life, Serafina was truly, deeply afraid. underscore 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 underscore. Cecilia was silent. She didn't glare. She didn't curse. She didn't even smirk. She just stood there, staring at the spot where Arthur had been, an unfamiliar tightness gripping her throat. She wasn't used to this feeling. This loss of control. Arthur was supposed to be hers. At first, he had been nothing more than an interesting toy, an amusing distraction from the dull monotony of perfect noble life. He was different from the men she was used to, those pathetic little creatures who either groveled at her feet or cowered before her presence. Arthur didn't do either. He defied her. Smirked at her. Challenged her. He made her laugh. Cecilia had never expected to want someone before. She had played with people, twisted them around her fingers, but Arthur was different. At first, she thought she was just entertained. Then she realized she was intrigued. And before she knew it, she had fallen. She hadn't even realized it until it was too late. Until she started craving his attention. Until every stolen moment, every teasing remark, every flicker of those blue eyes sent something wild and possessive clawing inside of her. Arthur had become an addiction. And Cecilia Slatemark never lost. But now? Now, for the first time, she felt like she was losing. Her nails dug into her palms, but she barely noticed. He had chosen Rose first. Rose. That quiet, sweet, boring girl who didn't scheme, didn't seduce, didn't fight for him the way she and the other princesses did. And yet, he had picked her. That thought sent something ugly twisting in Cecilia's chest. Why? Had she been too bold? Too obvious? Had she scared him? No, that wasn't it. Arthur wasn't the type to be scared. Then why? Had she become too desperate? Cecilia Slatemark, desperate? The idea would have made her laugh if it weren't so damn true. She was desperate. Because the thought of Arthur slipping through her fingers, of someone else having his undivided love, made her feel sick. It was worse than jealousy. It was an unbearable, all-consuming ache. She had fought for him. She had thrown away every ounce of dignity she was supposed to have as a noble princess, just for the chance to have him. And yet, Rose had won. No, not one. That was the worst part. Arthur still loved her. He still wanted her. But he had pushed her away. That rejection burned more than anything else. Because Arthur wasn't a fool. He knew what he meant to her. He knew how deeply she was consumed by him. And still, he had chosen someone else first. Did that mean she wasn't enough? Cecilia never wasn't enough. She was the most desired woman in the empire. Men begged for her attention, families schemed for their sons to marry her, and yet none of it mattered. Because the only man she wanted was the one who was slipping through her grasp. A tremor ran through her fingers. For the first time in her life, Cecilia felt small. Weak. She hated it. She clenched her jaw, forcing the emotions down. Cecilia moved with purpose, her steps light but unhesitating as she made her way through the gardens. The moonlight bathed the path in silver, the scent of roses lingering in the cool night air. She could sense him. And Rose. Her fingers curled into her palm as she kept walking. Then she saw them. Arthur and Rose, wrapped in each other's arms, dancing as if the world around them didn't exist. Their laughter was soft, their whispers too quiet to hear, but the sight of them alone was enough to make something tighten in Cecilia's chest. Then, the kiss. She stopped. Her breath caught for just a fraction of a second before she forced herself to keep moving, her steps measured, deliberate. Rose noticed her first, giving Arthur's hand one last squeeze before stepping back. Cecilia didn't take her eyes off him. "Arthur," she said, voice softer than usual. He turned, his azure eyes flickering with something unreadable before settling on her. "Cecilia." She hesitated, just for a moment. Then, she exhaled. "I'm sorry." Arthur's brows raised slightly, but his expression remained calm. He glanced at Rose. "Rose, I need to talk to Cecilia alone." Rose gave a small, knowing smile before stepping away, disappearing down the garden path. Arthur turned his full attention to her. "You're apologizing?" "Yes," Cecilia nodded, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "For how I acted. For pushing you. For treating you like something to be won rather than someone to be loved." Arthur studied her, his expression unreadable. "And?" Cecilia swallowed. "Anne. I can't help it," she admitted. "I want you. I need you. But I shouldn't try to own you." Arthur exhaled, something in his shoulders relaxing just slightly. "Good," he said simply. For a second, silence settled between them, the tension less charged, more fragile. Then, Cecilia pursed her lips. Then. She hesitated before squaring her shoulders, a smirk flickering across her lips. "If you want, you can touch them. As an apology gift." Arthur blinked. His entire brain seemed to stutter. "What?" Cecilia folded her arms, her smirk deepening. "Come on, I know you do." Arthur exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Cecilia." "You're a guy," she interrupted, tilting her head. "And you like me. What's the issue?" Arthur closed his eyes for a long moment before looking at her again, azure eyes sharp and steady. "The issue," he said, voice flat, "is that I am not a pervert." Cecilia's lips twitched. "Debatable." Arthur groaned. "Cecilia." She held his gaze for a moment longer before sighing, dropping the teasing edge. "Fine," she said, softer this time. I don't know how to do this properly, Arthur." He stilled. Cecilia turned away slightly, arms still folded as she stared up at the moon. "I meant what I said. I want you to be happy. I don't know how to deal with this." She motioned vaguely between them. "With us." Arthur was silent for a moment before stepping closer. "Then we'll figure it out," he said simply. Cecilia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A small, almost imperceptible smile ghosted her lips. "You're way too soft, you know that?" Arthur snorted. "I have to be, with you." She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Instead, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Then, without warning, she leaned up and kissed his lips. Arthur blinked. Cecilia smirked. "There," she said. "Now we're even." Arthur sighed, shaking his head, but there was the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. Cecilia stepped back, hands on her hips. "I'll stop pushing so much. But I'm not giving up. I still want you." Arthur met her gaze, steady and unshaken. "I know." Cecilia tilted her head, eyes gleaming. "And one day, Arthur." She leaned in slightly, voice dropping to a whisper. "You will want me just as much as I want you." Then, with a swirl of crimson manna, she turned and walked away, her laughter lingering in the air long after she had disappeared into the night. "If it's for Arthur, I don't mind." Chapter 254, Prelude to Second Mission, 3. It was time to select a mission. The first practical evaluation of our second year at Mythos Academy had begun, and as rank 1, I had the privilege, and the responsibility, of choosing a suitable challenge. The list of options was vast, a scroll of assignments that ranged from subjugation of rogue beasts to artifact retrieval in dangerous ruins. Plenty of missions, each stamped with its own level of importance, each with its own dangers. But my eyes stopped on one. Mission: investigation in the city of Redmond. Collaborate with the guilds and discover the root cause of the disturbances in the city. Redmond. That name alone was enough to make my mind sharpen. It was a place of silent warfare, a city of veiled threats and unseen puppeteers. More importantly, it was where Reka Solien was. Although I'd already met Reka in Avalon, Mavrin Academy, her academy was located in Redmond. That meant she was there, living under the looming shadow of a secret war she had no idea about. A war that, if things played out as they had in the novel, would consume her. Because the real problem wasn't the disturbances. It was Red Knot, a silver-ranked guild that masqueraded as a legitimate organization but was nothing more than a front for Red Chalice, a cult hiding in plain sight. Nobody knew that yet. Not the barony overseeing the city. Not the mercenaries who worked with the guild. Not even the investigators who had come before. Red Knot moved quietly, burrowing into the city's underbelly like a parasite, slowly infecting its institutions. On the surface, they answered to the Baron of Redmond, a man who had influence but lacked the sheer brute force to contend with a battle-hardened guild. The two sides were locked in a cold war. For now. But that was going to change soon. Because Red Knot wanted Reka. They wanted to claim her for themselves, to turn her into a tool, to force her to awaken her latent power through sheer trauma. And they were going to do it the worst way possible. Her foster family, who would attend Mavrin Academy's end-of-year festival. Slaughtered. Right in front of her. A sacrifice to break her. And I was going to stop that. A silver-ranked guild, are you sure you're up to it? Luna's voice echoed in my mind, thoughtful, testing. Of course. If I couldn't deal with a single silver-ranked guild, then I had no right to dream of reaching the top. There was no hesitation. No room for doubt. Because doubt wouldn't save Reka. Doubt wouldn't be there when the cult came to take her. Doubt wouldn't do a damn thing. Your standards are very high, Luna mused. They have to be, I replied. I tapped the selection panel, locking in my mission. The notification blinked green, sealing my choice. But there was one last thing I needed to do before heading to Redmond. I needed to secure Jean Ashbluff. It was time to bring him into Ouroboros. The training field at this hour was nearly deserted. Nearly. I could see a lone figure standing in the center of the training ground, sword in hand, his back turned to me. Jean Ashbluff. He moved with controlled intensity, his blade carving through the air with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Sparks of dark mana pulsed along the edge of his sword, the mark of his lineage. Since he hadn't yet reached integration rank or begun the integration process, he didn't have deep dark. But that would change in the future since he also had a black star like me. It was a sight few had the privilege of witnessing. Because Jean, despite his reputation, rarely let anyone see him train. But I wasn't just anyone. I took a step forward, my presence rippling through the mana-rich air. Jean stopped mid-swing. His shoulders tensed. He didn't turn around immediately, but I could feel his senses sharpening. Arthur. His voice was steady, unreadable. What do you want? Instead of answering, I lifted a hand. Behind me, Erebus emerged from the shadows. Dark energy coiled from my lich's form, seeping into the ground like ink spilling into water. The training field dimmed, as if the moon itself had been blotted out. A supernatural domain. A space beyond the Academy's surveillance. The world outside faded. No spying spells. No outside eyes. Nothing but me, Jean, and the truth I was about to drop on him. Jean finally turned, his dark eyes narrowing. What are you doing? I smiled faintly. Just making sure no one listens in. He exhaled through his nose, clearly irritated. I'm not in the mood for games, Arthur. I know about Rin. Silence. Jean didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't even breathe. For a moment, I wondered if I had broken him. Then the world exploded. Jean lunged without hesitation, his sword cleaving through the air with all the force of a thunderclap. His mana surged, a dense, suffocating wave of deathly energy aimed straight for my throat. Fast. But not fast enough. I sidestepped, my body tilting just enough for his blade to miss by a hair's breadth. At the same time, I flicked my wrist, redirecting the force of his swing just enough to throw him off balance. Jean spun mid-air, using the momentum to launch another strike, this time coated in necrotic aura. Faster. Sharper. Stronger. I still caught it. With a flicker of deep dark, my fingers met the flat of his blade, twisting it away. A perfectly timed counter. Jin's eyes widened as his own weapon was ripped from his grip, flipping end over end before embedding itself into the ground a few meters away. I stood over him as he staggered back, panting. Are you done? I asked. Currently, the level between us was wide. Jean was yet to reach even white rank while I was already beyond that. Jean wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, glaring at me with the kind of raw fury that only came from being utterly outmatched. What do you want? His voice was lower this time. More dangerous. I met his gaze. A mana oath. His fingers curled into fists. For what? You will support me, I said simply. In everything I intend to do. Jean narrowed his eyes. And what do I get in return? I tilted my head. I won't tell anyone about Rin. Jin's body tensed. And more importantly, I continued, I will save her. For the first time, hesitation crossed his face. You think you can save her? His voice was quiet now. You don't even know what she is. I know more than you think, I replied. The gift of duality, the power to wield both mana and miasma. A gift so unstable that it's breaking her mind. A power so dangerous that your father will be forced to kill her before she reaches radiant rank. Jin's hands trembled. Because I was right. No matter how much he loved his sister, no matter how much he wanted to protect her. If Rin reached radiant rank, she would become something beyond salvation. Something not human anymore. Something even the Ash Bluffs couldn't control. He knew this. And yet, he still wanted to believe she could be saved. I'll do what your family can't, I said. I'll keep her alive. Jean looked at me, something unreadable flickering in his dark eyes. A long silence stretched between us. Then, slowly, reluctantly, he extended his hand. The air crackled. Mana surged between us, intertwining, forming the unbreakable contract of a mana oath. Jean clenched his jaw. If you break your end. I won't, I interrupted. Because I don't make promises I can't keep. The oath sealed. A pulse of mana. A binding force. A contract between two monsters who would one day change the world. Chapter 255, Prelude to Second Mission, 4. Callie stared at me like I had just announced I was going to arm wrestle a dragon. Jean, on the other hand, had the expression of a man slowly coming to terms with the fact that he had made a very, very bad decision. So what you're telling me, Callie began slowly, her fingers drumming against the table, is that you blackmailed Prince Jean Ashbluff and forced him to join our guild? Yep. I nodded. Jin's glare could have cut steel. Callie exhaled through her nose, then looked at Jean. I understand you, Your Highness, she said, shaking his hand solemnly. This crazy bastard did the same thing to me. I want you to know, you are not alone. Jean blinked at her. What? Shut up and sit down, I said, rubbing my temples. Callie sat down with exaggerated obedience, giving me a deadpan stare. As you say, sir. And why are both of you acting like you don't get benefits from this? I sighed. Benefits in the future, Callie corrected, her arms crossed. Jean nodded. I resisted the urge to groan. These two together were going to be a nightmare. So, Callie drawled, why did you call me here? Just to tell me that you've added another victim to your collection? No, I shook my head. Choose a mission in Redmond City. I need you there. Callie leaned back, arms still crossed. And what exactly are we doing in Redmond? Destroying a silver-ranked guild and getting a reward from a baron. There was silence. Jean blinked. Callie stared. Then Callie leaned forward, very slowly, her hands flat on the table. Arthur. Yes? Are you insane? Jean, to his credit, remained composed. A silver-ranked guild is far too high a target. Their strength varies, but at minimum, their guild master will be ascendant rank, maybe even mid or high tier. A bronze-ranked guild, sure. We could handle that. But silver? That's suicide. It's not, I said, shaking my head. You both need to think more. Callie let out a laugh. A loud, unhinged laugh. Think more, she repeated, her voice shaking. Oh. Oh. Yes. Why didn't I think of that? I should just think. That fixes everything. What a genius you are, Arthur. You should write a book. Just think harder, how to survive utterly stupid situations. Geez, keep your yelling down, I sighed. I'm not asking you to kill an ascendant ranker. There's only one in Redmond, and he's just closing in on mid-ascendant rank. I'll handle him. Callie's mouth snapped shut. Jean frowned. You're planning to take on an ascendant ranker alone? Yes. More silence. Then Callie leaned toward Jean. Did he hit his head recently? Jean shook his head. Not that I know of. Maybe he needs to, she muttered. Jean exhaled sharply. Arthur. You're strong. Ridiculously strong for our age. But an ascendant ranker is. I know exactly what an ascendant ranker is. I met his gaze. And I know how to kill one. That shut them both up. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Callie exhaled, rubbing her temples. You're really not going to let this go, huh? Nope. Of course not, she muttered. Why did I even ask? Jean crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. Fine. But I want every detail of your plan before we go in. Naturally, I agreed. And so, I explained the plan to them in detail. Callie got up from her chair without a word. She paced across my room once. Then twice. Then, without warning, she slapped herself across the face. Holy shit, I'm awake, she muttered, blinking rapidly like she was trying to clear a hallucination. I narrowed my eyes. Sit down. She flopped back into her seat, rubbing her temple. What a crazy plan. Jean exhaled, his fingers laced together, his expression unreadable. All right. Let's assume for a second that you're correct. That means we're going up against a bishop of the Red Chalice cult. Explain to me how there's a bishop left when they should have all been wiped out. I met his gaze evenly. I don't know. That was a lie. But they didn't need to know that. Either way, our goal is clear, I continued. We expose the cult's presence in Redmond and eliminate the bishop before they gain enough influence to act openly. Callie leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. The plan seems foolproof, she admitted, but there's something I don't get. This Reka girl, she's really worth all this trouble? Why not just have Cecilia pull some strings and get an investigation going? I shook my head. It's not that simple. Jean frowned. Why not? I sighed. The 12 diamond-ranked guilds balanced the imperial family and the council, forming a quad of power alongside the Tower of Magic. Their eyes flickered with understanding. The empire was not under complete control of a single entity. Although the imperial family technically ruled the empire, in reality it was a four-way chess match between the Council of Nobles, representing the wealth and influence of the aristocracy, the imperial family, wielding authority over the government and military, the Tower of Magic, controlling the regulation of spellcasters and magical research, the Summit of Guilds, an assembly of the 12 diamond-rank guilds, ensuring that adventurers and mercenaries had autonomy from the state. Each faction had its own interests, its own power struggles. And no single faction could afford to act unilaterally without stepping on the toes of the others. It's difficult for the imperial family to randomly investigate any guild, I explained. Even a bronze rank one. They need solid evidence, or at the very least, strong probable cause. Jean clicked his tongue. How annoying. I glanced at him. Of course, he would find this kind of system frustrating. On the Western continent, things were different. The Ashbluff family was the law. There was no balancing act, no political struggle between factions. The entire West bowed to their rule, and any noble house that thought otherwise had been crushed beneath their heel. Power there was absolute. Here, it was a game. One with far too many players, all carefully weighing their next move. Jean exhaled, shaking his head. In the West, we don't waste time on bureaucracy. If someone needs to die, they die. Callie snorted. Yes, very inspiring. Kill first, never ask questions. No wonder people are so afraid of your family. Jean didn't argue. I leaned back in my chair. That's exactly why we can't rely on official channels. If we want to solve this problem, we do it our way. Jean and Callie exchanged a glance. Then Jean sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine. I'll help. Callie groaned, running a hand through her hair. I can't believe I'm doing this. Fine. I'll get us a mission in Redmond. But if we die because of your ridiculous plans, I will haunt you in the afterlife, Arthur. And I will be annoying. I smirked. Duly noted. Seriously, how do you come up with this kind of stuff? Callie muttered, shaking her head like she was experiencing a migraine in real time. And you still didn't answer Jean. Is Reika worth all of this? Both of them were staring at me now, waiting for an answer. I exhaled. Yes. Jean narrowed his eyes. Just like that? You'll understand when you meet her, I said simply. Don't judge too quickly. Reika is a monster. Callie scoffed. You are the only monster in this world. Jean nodded in agreement. I don't think we need another one. I smirked but said nothing. They would see soon enough. Also, I continued, shifting the subject, I need you to get Elias to do some digging. We need information on the last of the Special Four. Jean frowned. This is going to be someone weird, isn't it? Probably, Callie shrugged. But whatever. I'll send the request to him. She stretched, arching her back with a tired groan. Then, she peered at me with a familiar look in her eye. Can I shower in your room again? I raised a brow. Why? Because I came straight here after training since someone said it was urgent, she huffed, gesturing vaguely at herself. Look, I'm covered in sweat. You'll live, I replied dryly. Go shower in your own room. Callie clicked her tongue. Fine, fine. See if I care. Jean got up as well, rolling his shoulders. I'm heading out too. With that, the two of them left. I exhaled, rubbing the bridge of my nose before collapsing back onto my bed. The mission was set. The pieces were moving. And Redmond was waiting. Chapter 256, Second Mission, 1. It was already time to leave for the mission. Rachel stared at her suitcase, fingers lightly tracing the edge of the handle before she sighed and pushed it into her storage ring. She still hadn't made up with Arthur. Every time she saw him, he was either talking to Rose or exchanging words with Cecilia. They were working things out, mending the fractures, stitching themselves back together. But she and Serafina, they were still standing on the other side of that bridge, waiting for something that wasn't coming. Rachel clenched her wrist. She missed him. Too much. It was a constant ache, a gnawing pull at the edges of her thoughts. Arthur, Arthur, Arthur. She bit her lip. And now, Callie was showing up in the dorms again. His dorms. There was no one else Callie would be visiting, and of course, Arthur swore nothing was happening, but still. Rachel shut her eyes, inhaling deeply through her nose. It wasn't like her to sulk. Yet here she was, stewing in thoughts she had no control over. Her phone vibrated softly. She glanced at the screen. Mission confirmation, Redmond City. Redmond was large enough that there were multiple assignments in the area. Even a silver-ranked guild operated there, along with a baron overseeing the city's governance. Plenty of work to go around. Plenty of reasons for students to be deployed. Plenty of coincidences that placed her and Arthur in the same city. She let out a slow breath. It was childish, wasn't it? The way she clung to the idea of just seeing him, even from afar. Rachel shook her head, pressing her lips together before standing up straight. She wasn't worried about the mission. A white ranker like her wasn't going to struggle. It was everything else she was worried about. With one last glance at her phone, she turned on her heel, making her way toward the hyperloop that would take her to the warp gate. Time to go to Redmond City. Underscore 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 underscore. Redmond City greeted me with the usual chaos of an urban sprawl, hovering carriages humming along the sky lanes, neon-lit signboards flickering in the evening haze, and the ever-present murmur of a million lives intertwining. And, of course, an almost offensive amount of the word red plastered over everything. Redmond. Red Knot. Red Square. Red District, which, thankfully, was just a marketplace and not something more dubious. Did they just run out of ideas? I muttered under my breath, scratching the back of my head as my gaze swept across the cityscape. Waiting for me near the entrance was my assigned guide from the Red Knot Guild. A woman, early 20s, dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail, her uniform crisp, her stance relaxed but deliberate. She was beautiful in that effortless, practical way, sharp eyes, a confident stride, but what stood out the most was her mana. Mid-integration rank. That was not standard for a simple guide duty. I glanced at her again, subtly adjusting my assessment. A silver-ranked guild had access to dozens of integration rankers, but even then, sending someone at mid-integration was no small gesture. Something wasn't adding up. On the surface, a guide made sense. Mythos students needed to be monitored to prevent any accidents, and Redmond City wasn't exactly the safest place. But given the circumstances, they were overcompensating. The Red Knot Guild wasn't just investigating the recent disturbances. They were orchestrating them. The whole request for aid from Mythos was a farce, a well-staged act to keep suspicions at bay. And yet, here I was, greeted with a bright smile like this was just another day at work. Hello. Nice to meet you, I'm Milia, she said, her tone light and professional, extending a hand. I took it, meeting her grip with a polite, practiced smile. Arthur Nightingale. Likewise. Her eyes flickered with something, recognition. Wow, she said, blinking before letting out a small laugh. Oh, sorry. It's just, well, you're kind of famous. I raised an eyebrow. Am I? She scratched her cheek, a bit sheepish. Well, yes. I mean, rank 1 of Mythos Academy during its greatest year, danced with 3 princesses and survived. That sort of thing tends to make the rounds. Ah, I said, still smiling. I suppose that would do it. She chuckled, motioning for me to follow as we started walking through the city. The mission is about the recent disturbances in Redmond, Milia explained, slipping back into business mode. There's been a rise in organized crime, a string of kidnappings, disappearances, and murders. Nothing too large-scale yet, which is why the full force hasn't stepped in, but it has the potential to escalate quickly. I nodded, absorbing the information. A city of over 1 million people had its fair share of crime. Even with a silver-ranked guild looming over it, problems like this weren't unusual. And given that Red Knot was very close to pushing for gold rank status in the coming years, they had every reason to keep their reputation clean. On paper. In reality, they were the source of the disturbances. And yet, the Baron overseeing the city, who should have been keeping them in check, hadn't acted decisively. A silent power struggle. A guild and a noble, both too powerful to remove the other, waiting for a tipping point. That meant I had a lot more to worry about than just the criminals in the shadows. Still, a mid-integration ranker as a guide? I said casually, glancing at her. That's a bit much for a simple escort duty, don't you think? Milia smiled, a well-practiced curve of the lips that revealed absolutely nothing. Red Knot takes our partnerships with Mythos Academy very seriously, she said smoothly. We wouldn't want a promising student like yourself running into trouble. Of course, I said, matching her smile. She was lying. Not outright, there was some truth to her words. But I wasn't here because they were concerned about my safety. I was here because they wanted to keep an eye on me. The real question was, did they think they could actually stop me if I got in their way? Of course, they can't stop a crazy bastard like you, Luna scoffed in my mind. Remember, we need to gather evidence, I reminded her, glancing at the city stretched out before me. Redmond was still shrouded in the illusion of peace, but beneath that thin veneer, a tangled web of crime and corruption lurked, one that had to be severed at the root. Taking down a bishop is meant to be impossible for someone like you, she said flatly. She wasn't wrong. At my current ability, even defeating a high integration ranker, someone with resonance, was a long shot. Their mastery over mana went beyond simple augmentation. They could align themselves with their element so seamlessly that their very presence warped reality. Fighting them head-on would be suicide. But a bishop? That was an entirely different game. A bishop of the Red Chalice cult wasn't just a strong fighter. They were a leader, a symbol of faith, a puppet master operating in the shadows, orchestrating entire networks of influence while remaining untouchable. Their power wasn't just physical, it was political, social, and ideological. That was why this wasn't going to be a battle. It was going to be a hunt. Chapter 257, Second Mission, 2. How exactly are we going to do this hunt? Luna asked me in my mind, her voice edged with skepticism as I reached the hotel. It was officially a break day, which only made it clearer just how lazily the Red Knot Guild was approaching all this. A cabal of criminals masquerading as adventurers, taking their sweet time while the city rotted. Bureaucracy, corruption, and general incompetence, the holy trifecta of why things rarely got done in an orderly fashion. Well, obviously, I need a few key pieces first, I replied, pushing open the hotel door. And one of them should be arriving soon. Luna barely had time to begin her protest before she stiffened, eyes narrowing as her senses caught up. Oh, you planned this, she muttered. That's terrifying. Even my foresight can't predict your moves. It's like trying to read a book while someone keeps turning the pages out of order. Why, thank you, I said, just as a knock rapped against the door. With a small smile, I strode over and pulled it open, revealing a woman with striking red hair and the kind of expression that suggested she'd spent too much time being deeply unimpressed with the world. She raised a badge, displaying it like a royal decree that might somehow demand my respect. "Hello, Arthur," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "I am Carrie Milton, Vice Guild Master of the Red Knot Guild." "Please, come in," I said, stepping aside with a graciousness I absolutely did not feel. Carrie entered with the careful precision of someone who expected to find knives behind the furniture. She sat herself down on the couch, and I took the seat opposite her, mirroring her stiff posture just enough to be mildly irritating. "I formally greet the Vice Guild Master of the Red Knot Guild as the official Guild Master of the Bronze Rank Guild, Ouroboros," I said, tone polite but deliberately weighty. I had officially become the Guild Master after using Cecilia's influence to skip the test and get the 6-star adventurer license. Carrie nodded, though there was a faint tightening of her expression, mild disappointment, the kind that came from realizing that a newly minted bronze rank guild was about as useful as a paper sword in a rainstorm. The guild ranking system was a mess. The gap between bronze and silver rank was wider than the ocean, and Ouroboros was brand new. Not exactly a reliable ally in her mind, especially if she had the same suspicions I did. "I came because of the message you sent," Carrie said finally, her words slow and careful. "The possible corruption within the Red Knot Guild." She knew. At least, she had an idea. Carrie was one of the few untainted members of the guild, an unfortunate soul whose reputation for righteousness had gotten her hired but whose fundamental trust in others had made her easy to deceive. The guild master had played her like a well-tuned instrument. Not perfectly, though. "Yes," I said, leaning forward. "The crimes plaguing this city, they all trace back to them. I need your help to expose it." Carrie's lips pressed into a thin line. There was doubt in her eyes, a wariness born from knowing she was dangerously close to a truth she might not be ready for. This was always the tricky part. Getting people to see what was right in front of them. "You know it too, don't you?" I pressed, watching Carrie's face with the kind of patience usually reserved for people trying to convince a cat to come inside during a rainstorm. "You don't want to admit it. That's fine. I don't want to believe it either. That's why the investigation will focus on gathering evidence first." That, of course, was an absolute, bald-faced lie. But the wonderful thing about lies was that most people weren't particularly good at detecting them. Only those with an almost supernatural ability to read people, like the 3 princesses, could truly see through my deceptions. Carrie, despite her experience, wasn't one of them. "I understand," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone clutching at the last remaining threads of optimism. "I don't want to believe this either." "Exactly. And if we find out we were wrong, all the better." I smiled, all warmth and reassurance, like a doctor telling a patient that the good news is, they probably won't need surgery. "But if we're right, then I need someone like you on my side." Carrie Milton hadn't become the Vice Guild Master of Red Knot by sheer luck. She was a low ascendant ranker, which meant she was one of 2 people in this city who could actually deal damage to the bishop. Strong, experienced, competent. Exactly the kind of person I needed to make sure this plan didn't crumble into 1,000 tiny regrets. "So what's your plan?" she asked, the skepticism in her voice thick enough to spread on toast. I laid it out for her, step by step, from the subtle maneuvering to the more direct interventions, explaining each part with the care of someone defusing a particularly volatile bomb. She listened, silent and focused, her expression shifting from doubt to calculation. When I finished, she leaned back, exhaling. "It could work," she muttered, then frowned. "No. It should work. Even if the guild master was a high ascendant ranker." "Well, but of course," I said smoothly, as if this wasn't something I'd been planning with the obsessive detail of a mad scientist trying to reanimate a corpse. Carrie studied me for another moment before nodding. "All right. I'm in." That was the thing about good people. Once they saw the right path, they didn't hesitate. They didn't second guess. They just moved forward, no matter what it cost them. And you mentioned this Reika girl, she's their main target? Yes, I nodded, keeping my voice even. The Red Knot Guild has been corrupted by one of the 4 cults. Another lie. It was the Red Chalice cult, but saying that outright would be like telling someone their childhood bedtime stories were actually real and out to get them. As far as most people were concerned, the Red Chalice cult had been wiped off the face of existence. Mentioning them would get me the kind of look reserved for lunatics and prophets. Better to let Carrie figure that part out on her own. Carrie tapped a finger against her knee, thinking. Her eyes weren't on me anymore but staring somewhere past me, the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves that what they're about to do isn't going to end in disaster. I'll need to be careful, she said finally. If the guild master or anyone else suspects I'm working against them, they'll deal with you before you can be a problem, I finished for her, nodding. Which is why you're not working against them. You're just investigating a few inconsistencies. Following standard procedure. A responsible vice guild master doing her job. Carrie let out a sharp breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. Right. And if things go wrong? I shrugged. Then we adjust. Improvise. Hope they haven't already prepared for that. That got me a dry look, the kind that suggested she was reevaluating every life choice that had brought her to this conversation. Your confidence is inspiring. I try, I said, standing up. In any case, I'll get things moving on my end. You just make sure you stay out of sight when you need to. Carrie stood as well, adjusting her coat. And you'll keep me updated? As much as I can, I promised. And if anything urgent comes up, I'll make sure you know. She studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. All right. Then I'll start looking into things from the inside. Discreetly. That's the spirit, I said, walking her to the door. And, Carrie? She paused, one hand on the handle. Be careful, I said, my voice losing the casual edge. Carrie gave me a small, humorless smile. I will be. With that, she pulled open the door and stepped out, the dim hallway light casting shadows over her face. She didn't look back as she walked away, disappearing around the corner with the kind of determination that usually led to either heroism or disaster. I closed the door behind her and let out a breath. Well. That's one piece in place. Now I just had to make sure the rest of them didn't fall apart before the game even started. Chapter 258, Second Mission, 3. God, he's really crazy, isn't he? Callie said, leaning back in her chair and lazily stirring her tea. It was a rich, fragrant blend, the kind that was probably meant to be appreciated in silence, but she had never been much for subtlety. Just a bit, Gene shrugged, picking up his drink, a chocolate mocha drowned in whipped cream, an abomination of sugar and caffeine. It was the sort of thing that would have given a nutritionist an aneurysm. Callie raised an eyebrow. I didn't expect the Prince of the Dead to be drinking something that has more sugar than an entire bakery. Sugar is the only pleasure in my life, Gene replied flatly, taking another sip. Callie shuddered. Right. That wasn't ominous at all. Her gaze flickered over him again, and she frowned slightly. Anyway, I'm surprised you broke through to white rank. She could sense it easily, his mana had sharpened, his aura denser than before. I forced it a little, he admitted, setting his cup down. But it won't mess up my growth. I'll still reach integration rank at the right time. Makes sense, Callie mused. Even though she was still stronger, the gap had narrowed. That meant Gene would have a bigger role to play in Arthur's plans, which was, honestly, a terrifying thought. I can't believe he's making us play babysitter, Gene muttered, his dark eyes landing on the reason they were even here in the first place, a young woman with violet hair, sitting alone at a table near the window. She was 2 years older than them but noticeably weaker. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that for some reason, Arthur had decided she was important. I don't see what's so special about her, Callie admitted, narrowing her eyes. Before Gene could reply, she stiffened. Someone was approaching her. "Look," Jean murmured, voice calm but alert. "A guy's coming closer to her." Callie turned her head slightly, just enough to get a good look without being obvious. The man was tall, well-built, dressed in casual but practical clothes, the sort that wouldn't stand out in a crowd but had enough flexibility to throw a punch if necessary. A small insignia was stitched onto the sleeve of his jacket. "Red Knot," she muttered. The man stopped next to Reika's table and leaned in slightly, a smile on his face that was just a little too wide to be friendly. "Reika," he said smoothly. "We need to talk." Reika didn't even look up from her tea. "I already said no." "Come on," the man pressed, still smiling but with less patience now. "You know the guild would be good for you. You've got potential." Reika sighed and finally glanced at him, expression bored. "If I had potential, you wouldn't be trying this hard." Jean chuckled under his breath. "Not bad." The man's smile twitched. He was still trying to play nice, but there was a tightness in his shoulders now, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "You don't want to make this difficult," he said, voice lowering just slightly. "We're giving you an opportunity." "And I'm giving you an answer," Reika shot back. "No." For a second, there was silence. Then, the man reached out. Not violently, not yet, just a simple, firm grip on Reika's wrist. The kind of move that could be excused later as just a misunderstanding. Callie and Jean moved at the same time. Callie's hand landed on the man's wrist before he could tighten his grip, her nails digging in just enough to be felt. "I really wouldn't do that if I were you," she said, voice light, almost playful. Jean, meanwhile, just stood up and took a slow sip of his mocha, watching the scene unfold with the vague interest of someone observing a mildly amusing street performance. But beneath the table, hidden by the cafe's dim lighting, his fingers twitched ever so slightly. The man didn't notice. He didn't notice as something slithered through the shadows beneath his feet. Didn't notice as it coiled, unseen, waiting. Didn't notice that Jean had just placed one of his summons directly into his shadow. Callie, however, did. And for the first time in a long time, she shook. She didn't see the summon, Jin's ability was far too refined for that, but she felt it. The moment it happened, the atmosphere around him shifted, like a door had silently creaked open to something vast and terrible, just beyond the veil of normal perception. The Ash Bluff gift. It wasn't just powerful. It was unnatural. "I only felt it because he wanted me to," Callie thought. The man, blissfully unaware of his new predicament, jerked his arm away with an annoyed grunt. "TCH. Fine," he muttered. "Not worth the trouble." He turned and walked off, his irritation clear in the way his steps were just a little too forceful. Jean sat back down, finally setting his cup on the table. "That was stupidly easy," Callie muttered under her breath. And when he did, well, he'd wish he had never walked into this cafe. "Thank you for helping me," Reika said, her voice soft but laced with unease. She hesitated, as if debating whether or not to say more, then sighed. "I'm sorry, but that man was a scout from the Red Knot Guild. I worry that they might come after you now." Callie snorted, the sound light and almost amused. "Don't worry. A mere silver-ranked guild won't touch us." Which was an understatement. Touching an Ash Bluff and a Malekith was the kind of thing that could turn a minor inconvenience into a full-blown war. Even one of the 12 diamond-ranked guilds would think twice before trying something that's suicidal. Red Knot, for all its posturing, wouldn't dare. Of course, the problem was that Red Knot wasn't just Red Knot anymore. Callie's gaze flicked over Reika, watching her carefully. "I still don't get why Arthur is so insistent about her. Dark yellow rank. Barely 3-star adventurer level. Maybe, with effort and luck, she could scrape her way up to silver rank someday. Useful, sure, but not worth the amount of interest Arthur was throwing her way. Not worth the trouble of personally dealing with a corrupt guild for her sake. Ouroboros needed strong people, but they also needed people who could become strong. Reika didn't look like one of them. Thank you, Reika said again, bowing her head slightly. We're from the Ouroboros Guild, Callie said, smiling just enough to be friendly but not enough to be trusted. You must have met one of our scouts in Avalon, right? Reika stiffened, her expression subtly shifting. Yes. She said carefully. Ah. Now she was on guard. Good. She wasn't completely naive. We understand you rejected our offer, Callie continued, raising her hands in a disarming gesture. We're not here to pester you about it. We were just concerned about Red Knot continuously scouting you. We thought it was best to handle it before it becomes a bigger issue. Reika's fingers curled slightly around the edge of her teacup. Will this require me to join your guild? Jin's eyes flicked toward her, his grip on his mocha tightening just slightly. Smart girl, Callie thought. That hesitation, the slight tremble in her voice, she was genuinely considering walking away from the protection they were offering just to avoid being tied to a guild she didn't trust. That took guts. Most people, when offered a way out of a dangerous situation, wouldn't think twice before grabbing it. But Reika did. No, Callie said simply, shaking her head. You have no obligation to us. Reika exhaled, her shoulders easing ever so slightly. As their conversation wound down, Callie slipped a business card across the table with the casual ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. Jean, meanwhile, took a rather less conventional approach, silently embedding one of his summons in Reika's shadow without her so much as twitching in response. Nobody will notice, right? Callie asked, though she already knew the answer. Jean nodded, finishing off the last of his sugar-laden monstrosity of a drink. Only if my summon needs to reveal itself, or if someone with a supernatural detection ability gets suspicious. Ascendant rankers with particularly sharp senses might pick up on it. Ordinary immortal rankers will, of course, but they have better things to do than snoop on random cafe patrons. And you can swap places with your shadow whenever you want, yeah? Part of my gift, Jean confirmed, stretching his fingers idly. So if something does go wrong, I can be there instantly. The chance of her actually being in danger just dropped significantly. Callie nodded, satisfied. It was a ridiculous ability, half teleportation, half living nightmare fuel. Every gift had different layers to it, like some overly complicated magical onion, and the necromancer's touch that ran through the Ash Bluff family was more like an entire cursed library of abilities stapled together under one banner. No wonder they ruled the Western continent. People tended to avoid picking fights with those who could rewrite the rules of life and death on a whim. Now, all that was left was to set the trap. After all, a good hunter always brings good bait. And the best bait? The kind that doesn't even realize it's on the hook. Chapter 259, Reika Solien, 1. The investigation, if you could even call it that, had been about as useful as a waterproof teabag. Milia had done her best to guide me through it, but really, what was the point? Red Knot was the ultimate force behind everything. Of course, they wouldn't be dumb enough to leave any obvious trails. It was like trying to prove a ghost committed a crime when said ghost was also the chief of police. Still, while that particular endeavor had been a waste of time, the rest of my plans were ticking along nicely. My phone buzzed. A single message. I glanced at it, and a slow smile curled my lips. Time to go visit Baron Aldrich Faulkner, the noble in charge of this city. Barons were the sort of people who pretended to have power while being very careful not to do anything with it. This one, however, was different. Baron Faulkner was well-liked. Competent. Pragmatic. Which meant that if he hadn't already stepped in regarding Red Knot, it was either because he didn't see the problem, or because he couldn't. That made him worth talking to. The Baron's office was a picture of efficiency, neat, practical, and lacking in unnecessary decoration. The man himself matched the room. Aldrich Faulkner was in his late 40s, built like someone who had once been a warrior but had since traded battlefields for paperwork. He looked up as I entered, expression neutral but sharp. Arthur Nightingale, he said, more of an observation than a greeting. I've heard about you. All good things, I hope, I said, stepping inside and taking the seat across from him. Some, he said dryly, folding his hands together on the desk. You requested a private meeting. What is it you need? Straight to the point. Good. I'm concerned about certain disruptions in the city, I said, keeping my tone casual. Crimes happening under everyone's noses. People disappearing. Forces moving in the background. I assume you've noticed? His gaze flickered, just for a second. Not much, but enough to confirm that yes, he had noticed. There are always problems in a city this size, he said, measured. I address what I can. Of course, I nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Though I imagine it must be difficult, with so much of the city's security focused elsewhere. Another flicker. This time, his lips pressed slightly thinner. I see you've done your homework, he said. I try. Aldrich exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. I won't waste your time. I am aware that something is happening. But I can't act. Not right now. And why's that? Because my forces, including my knight captain, are otherwise occupied. Now that caught my attention. The knight captain of the city wasn't just any ordinary knight, he was one of the 3 ascendant rankers stationed here. A former imperial knight, someone who had been deemed strong enough to serve directly under the empire itself before being posted here. If he was busy, it meant something serious was happening. That's a lot of firepower to be distracted, I said, keeping my voice even. It is, Faulkner agreed. Something important, then? A long pause. Then, a small, nearly imperceptible nod. Interesting. That changed things. I had come here expecting to nudge the Baron into action, maybe put some subtle pressure on him to shift his priorities. But if the city's highest-ranking knight was already tied up with something major, that meant my plans needed adjusting. I had counted on the city's forces being slow, complacent, or perhaps quietly complicit. Instead, they were busy. With what? And more importantly, was it connected? Well, I said, standing up with a polite smile. Thank you for your time, Baron Faulkner. You've given me a lot to think about. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. I imagine you have. As I walked out of his office, my mind was already shifting gears. Whatever the knight captain was dealing with, I needed to find out. And fast. My phone buzzed, the vibration sharp against my palm. Reika has been moved. Jin's message was short, to the point, and exactly the kind of news I didn't need right now. I inhaled slowly, exhaling through my nose. Improvise. That was the key. No frustration, no irritation. Just adapt. Plans were like glass. No matter how carefully you crafted them, they had a nasty habit of shattering when reality decided to stomp all over them. That didn't mean you couldn't use the shards. I flicked open my interface, thumb moving across the keyboard as I typed out a response to Jean. My mind was already recalibrating, spinning new threads into place. Redknot had moved her. That meant they were getting cautious. Or impatient. Either way, it didn't matter. They thought shifting the board around would change the game. But in the end, no matter how much a rabbit ran, no matter how clever it thought it was still just prey. And the hunter always had the final move. Underscore 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 underscore. Dark shapes. Voices like echoes, stretched and warped, bleeding into each other. Reika couldn't see them clearly, only glimpses, like watching broken footage through a cracked screen. The figures moved, blurred and indistinct, their outlines shifting as though reality itself couldn't quite settle on what they were. Will she be able to hold? The compatibility is high. We just need more time. This one's different. We proceed carefully. Hands. She remembered hands, not soft, not warm. Cold, gloved, precise. They touched her skin, traced lines along her arms, her spine, her throat. Something hummed beneath her, inside her, a vibration that wasn't natural, wasn't human. Pain flickered in and out of awareness. It came in flashes, impossible to pin down, like her mind refused to remember it fully. She tried to scream once, but no sound came. She's adapting. Unbelievable. This could change everything. She knew those voices. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe her mind was lying to her. She tried to move, but her limbs weren't her own. She tried to open her eyes, but when she did, all she saw was light. A blinding, sterile white. And then Reika woke. Her body jerked, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. For a moment, the world felt like it was slipping, the edges of her vision curling in like reality was still deciding whether or not to keep her here. Then it settled. She was in a room. A white room. Empty, cold, artificial. A thick glass shield separated her from the other side. On the other end, watching her with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world, stood a man. She knew that face. The Guild Master of Red Knot. Her stomach twisted. The memories, the distorted, broken things in her head, threatened to surface again, but she pushed them down. Good, the man said, his voice smooth, almost friendly. You're awake. Reika forced herself to breathe evenly, to push down the trembling in her limbs. Fear was useless here. Panic wouldn't help her escape this situation. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, grounding herself in something, anything, real. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Even someone like you can't get away with kidnapping people. The Guild Master of Red Knot, Gregor Vale, tilted his head, then laughed. Not a chuckle. Not a smirk. A laugh. Amused, unbothered, as if she'd just told him the sky was made of cheese. Kidnapping, he repeated, wiping an imaginary tear from the corner of his eye. Oh, Reika, no. You misunderstand. I don't care. Reika's breath hitched. Gregor stepped closer to the glass, his reflection distorting slightly against the surface. You're thinking about this all wrong, he said, voice patient, like a teacher explaining something to a particularly slow student. This isn't about what I can or can't do. It's about what I will do. And I will use you, Reika. Her throat went dry. What? You are a weapon, Gregor said simply. Designed, built, and meant to serve my cult. A weapon. Something twisted in her gut. Reika's mind reeled, her thoughts struggling against themselves. No. That didn't make sense. It didn't make any sense. She was just a student. A weak one, at that. She wasn't anything special. She wasn't. I don't understand, she whispered, half to herself. Gregor sighed dramatically, shaking his head. You will, he said, watching her with a slow, creeping smile. Soon. Chapter 260, Reika Solien, 2. The moment the glass door slid open, something in me snapped shut. The air felt heavier, my body frozen in place as Bishop Vale stepped into the room. Not Gregor Vale. Not the Guild Master of Red Knot. A bishop of the Red Chalice cult. The truth sat in my mind like a sickness, crawling through the gaps in my memories, threading together the pieces I hadn't even realized were missing. The experiments. The whispers. The feeling of being reshaped into something I had never agreed to be. I could still hear the voices from my past, fragmented and distorted, buried under layers of time and fear. She's adapting. Increase the dosage. No, don't stop, she can take it. A failure? No. A prototype. A foundation for something greater. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my skin. Bishop Vale took another step forward, casual, unhurried. He was savoring this. You have no idea what you are, do you? He murmured. No matter. It's in you. You are ours. You always have been. I glared at him, even as my heart pounded, even as every part of me screamed to run, to fight. I don't belong to you. His expression didn't change. He just sighed, as if I had disappointed him, as if I was a child throwing a tantrum. Then he lifted his hand and tapped at the sleek device in his grip. And my world stopped. A screen blinked to life, displaying crisp, high-resolution images. A small, familiar house. A quiet neighborhood. People I knew. My family. Not my real family, I never had one of those. But the people who had taken me in. The ones who had made sure I had food, shelter, a home. The ones who had cared. They had nothing to do with this. They didn't even know who I really was. And yet, they were on that screen. Bishop Vale tilted his head, watching me carefully. Do I have your attention now? My hands shook. I forced them to steady. He didn't need an answer. He already knew. If you refuse, he continued, voice smooth and casual, as if he was discussing something as simple as dinner plans, I will erase them. Every single one of them. And not just their lives. Their records, their existence. It will be as if they never were. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip that smug, self-satisfied look off his face. I wanted to not feel so helpless. But I wasn't stupid. He had power. Connections. If he said he could make them disappear, he could. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. I understand. It felt like choking on glass. Bishop Vale smiled. Good girl. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. He stepped forward, placing his hand against the scanner near the door. A soft chime sounded, and the security system disengaged. A sharp hiss. A rush of cool, sterile air. The glass barrier between us slid away, and suddenly, there was nothing separating me from him. I wanted to move. I needed to move. But my body was locked in place, my breathing shallow, my mind spinning through every possible way out. None of them worked. Bishop Vale took another step forward, and then reality shattered. The air twisted. A ripple spread through the space around us, distorting the world as if someone had slashed through existence itself. Something else was here. A presence. Fast. Inescapable. A gleam of steel. A sword, cutting through the air in a blur. Bishop Vale turned, eyes widening, hand already moving. Too slow. The blade struck. I can't believe you would. The voice was sharp, laced with something between disbelief and fury. A red-haired woman stood near the shattered remains of the glass barrier, her sword still humming with raw energy. Carrie Milton. I knew her. The Vice Guild Master of Redknot. A skilled swordsman, good enough that, with the element of surprise, her blade had struck true. The enclosed space trembled as astral energy collided, a violent storm shredding through everything around us. The sheer force of it sent me flying backward. I hit the wall hard, the impact rattling my bones. I bit my lip, the sharp taste of blood grounding me. I can't just sit here. Activate, I muttered. And it did. The power I hated, the thing they had forced into me. The thing I never wanted. But the thing I had to live with. Black ink bloomed across my skin, ancient letters twisting and shifting, binding me, forcing my body past its limits. My mana rank surged. My veins burned. Blood rose in my throat, and I choked on it, coughing it out in a thick, crimson splatter against the pristine white floor. I looked up, vision swimming. 2 ascendant rankers clashed before me, a battle too fast, too brutal for my mind to fully process. Carrie's sword slashed, her movements sharp and precise, but Bishop Vale was no ordinary opponent. They moved like forces of nature, tearing through the space between them with raw power. I tried to push myself up. Don't step in. The voice was calm, yet firm. I turned my head, still gasping for air. A woman stood near me, her brows furrowed in something dangerously close to concern. The woman from Ouroboros. She had been there in the cafe. She had saved me before. We're too weak to intervene in that fight, Callie said simply. Then what? I swallowed, still tasting blood. What should we do? Callie's gaze flickered past me, and I followed it. My stomach dropped. Figures were descending into the room, cloaked figures, moving with unsettling coordination. Too many. Too fast. Not Red Knot members. Cultists. Survive, Callie said. And before I could process what that meant, she moved. Her hand touched my shoulder, and something dark uncoiled from within her, a living shadow that swallowed me whole. I felt the world tilt. My stomach lurched. Wah! And then the bubble popped, and I fell. I hit the floor hard, barely catching myself. My breath was ragged, my limbs trembling from the sudden displacement. I was still inside the guild building. Somewhere. A slow clap echoed from the shadows. Look who's here, a voice purred. I turned sharply. A woman stepped forward, her presence suffocating in the dim light. She wasn't wearing Red Knot's colors. She didn't need to. The air around her was wrong. I barely had time to react before something snapped around me. Chains. Cold, heavy, unyielding. They coiled around my body with unnatural precision, locking me in place before I could even attempt to resist. I struggled, but it was useless. My body was already in bad shape, and even at my best, I wouldn't have been able to overpower her. Priest, I realized, panic twisting inside me. Cultists had different roles. Fighters, assassins, spellcasters. Priests were among the worst of them. They didn't just use power, they enforced it. Did the bishop not make himself clear? The woman sighed, tilting her head. Resistance means your family dies. Her voice was sickly sweet, like poisoned honey. I clenched my jaw, refusing to speak. She hummed, amused. Ah. I see. You still think this is a bluff. A flick of her wrist, and a hologram materialized in the air. The image flickered to life, and my stomach dropped. My foster family. They were here. In Redmond. I couldn't breathe. We invited them for a little surprise, the woman said, her voice practically dripping with delight. And your stupid foster parents fell for it, too. So trusting. So eager to see their dear daughter. My body froze. I had assumed, no, hoped, that they were safe, far away, untouched by this nightmare. But they weren't. They were here. And they had no idea what was coming. The woman leaned closer, smiling. Now, she cooed, tell me, which one are you fine with dying first? She giggled, her eyes gleaming. Your foster mother? Your foster father? Maybe one of your little siblings? Tell me, tell me. The chains tightened around me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And for the first time since this nightmare had started, I felt something raw, something primal clawing at the edges of my mind. Not fear. Not despair. Something worse. The loss of being. The unraveling of everything that made me me. Something worse than death, something that left nothing behind, not even the right to exist. I couldn't lose them. Because if I did, I would lose myself. Because losing them means losing what it means to be yourself, right? The voice didn't belong to me. It whispered the thought at the exact same moment it formed in my mind, curling around it like a shadow that had been waiting there all along. The woman, Milia, I realized distantly, stiffened. Her smug amusement evaporated, her body snapping into motion, twisting to see the source of the voice. And froze. A blade rested against her throat. Cold. Steady. Perfectly placed. Let your guard down, Milia, a boy's voice said, light and teasing, like he was mildly disappointed in her. I knew that voice. I had heard it before. I forced my head to turn, my breath still tight in my lungs. There he was. Arthur Nightingale. The same boy who had tried to recruit me into Ouroboros before. Smiling. Like this was all a game he had already won.